Chapter 751. Bardi, the Mist Alliance, the Ottoman Empire, and the Mage Country. This was the first time that the four mega-empire factions were working together. This would doubtlessly attract a lot of attention. From a certain standpoint, this was already the second strongest faction in the mortal plane. Their every action would naturally attract countless gazes. Yep, they were still the second strongest faction. As long as the Holy Church didn't fail and the God of Holy Light didn't suddenly die, no one would be the strongest. In the hallways of the banquet hall, fairies were running around with cameras in their hands. Passers-by had to be careful to avoid these paparazzi from a mystical world. If they accidentally offended them, they would probably suffer worse than offending the king. The king would probably only be able to send you to prison, but these fairies were everywhere 24/7 and could easily destroy your reputation. The most famous, and also the most ridiculous, was probably an unlucky noble. A certain San Antonio count was reported to have willfully slaughtered his own citizens. As a result, he sealed off all the fairies' clubs and intelligence stations in his territory. And then, it was revealed that he had an affair with his son-in-law. Yep, it was his son-in-law. That's right, in that country's noble circles, being gay was a fashion. And this was only the beginning. When the furious daughter went to argue with her father, new news came out. It turned out that the daughter wasn't the count's biological daughter. The count's first wife had an affair with her personal knight. And then, the two of them were stunned. The father and daughter, who had been together for 30 years, actually weren't related by blood. This was something that even the count didn't know about, yet the fairies were able to dig it out. But before the count could even be happy, a bolt from the blue struck him. And that wasn't the end of it. He then discovered that his handsome son-in-law was actually the illegitimate son of his beloved maidservant from back in the day. He was actually his biological son. In the end, it was said that the three of them ended up together. If they were wrong, then so be it. This couldn't even be described as how chaotic the noble circles were. The noble circles were so chaotic that I couldn't bear to see them. Couldn't the nobles be a little more reliable? Even the nobles needed to follow the basic rules. You guys were so chaotic that I didn't have any confidence in humans. This would affect world peace. You guys couldn't be like this. That was what Roland said after hearing this news. When this news spread, countless people were like Roland, spitting out tea and food. Normal people had once again underestimated the moral limits of humans and the chaos of the noble circle. Another impression of this incident was that the various kingdoms had banded together to put pressure on the fairies. After all, humans weren't saints. Who didn't have a guilty conscience when standing in such a high position? The fairies' actions made them very flustered. In the end, the fairies compromised. After all, they had no combat power to speak of, and they had offended all the royalty. Even if they were fine, they could forget about journalism. The final conclusion was that the fairies normally wouldn't report on the private information of any country's nobles or royalty. The fairies would have to first submit a report to that country's official organization for approval before reporting it. Didn't this sound familiar? This was a famous system of censorship in a certain region. Of course, the fairies also received a series of benefits, such as the credibility of official support and so on. All kinds of publications and newspapers could also be sold everywhere. Of course, the fairies also received many benefits, such as public trust from official support. All sorts of publications and newspapers could also be sold everywhere. They also knew that they weren't liked by others. They never needed others' approval when gathering information. But this time, so many powerful individuals had gathered together. Just a few of them were like the fairies from various countries. They were already used to being treated coldly and disdainfully by large individuals. What they couldn't believe was that this time, someone actually voluntarily invited them to report. Originally, after the banquet, everyone should have gone their separate ways after chatting and preparing for the upcoming battle. However, most people left while I stayed behind. They were all high-level officials from various countries, as well as powerful individuals that I trusted. Since I met the fairies, I naturally brought them with me. This time, I was going to have a press conference. Since everyone knows who I am, I won't waste any more words. There's a reason why I've been running around all over the world and even fought against 2 chaos main gods. Perhaps you all think that it's still all right for you right now, and that the final victory will come even if it's difficult. But let me tell you that that's all nonsense. It's highly likely that tomorrow will be the end of the world. Actually, I had never been able to understand the main characters of those legendary stories. Even though they had worked so hard and gone through so many life and death trials to finally expose the Chaos main god scheme to destroy the world, they still decided to challenge the Chaos main god by themselves and use their lives to stop the Chaos main god scheme from succeeding. A legendary hero would at most bring along a few companions to challenge the Chaos main god. This sounded cool, but why did it seem so stupid when I thought about it? Since the Chaos main god wanted to destroy the world, why didn't you just publicize the news and let the military and police handle it? Not only would it be safer than risking your life by yourself, it would also have a much higher chance of success. In the end, why did you have to forcefully turn your plan to destroy the Chaos main god into an illegal private brawl? It wasn't like this world belonged to just one person. Since someone wanted to destroy everyone else's world, I should hang him up as a target and let him have a taste of the People's War. I don't know what will happen once Cavendish opens up the dimensional barrier. You can all imagine for yourselves. I took out the speech script that I had prepared beforehand and gave evidence. From start to finish, I spoke for more than half an hour. I started from the final decision made by the two goddesses of order and chaos during the immemorial war, all the way until I found clues about a certain Chaos main god and the Chaos Girls. Previously, I had always described calamities as the end of the world or the destruction of the world. However, most of the time, it would just be a change in the sky, with a new leader and species taking power. But this time, if things went too far, He would truly be finished. I swore on the holy light that I had a dozen pieces of evidence. I even emphasized the fact that Prophecy Grandmaster Akama had mysteriously been assassinated right after I had agreed on a prophecy date with him. The more I spoke, the uglier the emperors, kings, and dukes' expressions became. I heaved a sigh of relief when I saw how their expressions changed. All right, I tossed the responsibility to them. They didn't intend to die together with the world, so they would voluntarily help me find, block, and assassinate Cavendish. Meanwhile, the fairies backstage were constantly recording this scene with their memory crystals. Soon, the details of today's conference would be spread to every corner of the world through their channels. At that time, Cavendish would finally be able to experience what it felt like to be the public enemy of the entire world. Survival was the most basic instinct of all. Anyone who was sane and wanted to survive would find it difficult to agree with Cavendish's way of thinking. Perhaps even his allies would immediately turn against him. The main characters of those legendary stories aren't that smart. My way of dealing with things is the correct way. Fight to the death against Cavendish by myself? I wasn't that bored. I wasn't like Cavendish, who would always say, as long as you're happy, the results aren't important at all. For me, after putting in so much effort, the most important thing was that the results were good. Actually, with some slight adjustments, it's still the same type of legendary story. Look, he's fighting against the entire world by himself, and he's the main character who holds justice. Meanwhile, you're the demon king who gathered countless subordinates to obstruct and encircle the main character. The silly cat's retorts were as sharp and swift as ever. It was truly difficult to counter. Every time she said something like this, I would miss her cat form immensely. Meow? Meow is cute. You actually have a normal sense of beauty? Yep, it feels great, especially when you curl up into a ball and kick it. Chapter 752. I was probably already on the blacklist of the various kings, dukes, and tribe leaders. That was because every time I spoke, I would bring bad news and prophecies of misfortune. Those who tried to refute me or mock me were all proven to be shallow by time and reality. The prophecy of the holy war, the prophecy of the undead calamity, the elves facing a demon wave. It was quite strange to call it prophecy. I only made my judgment based on the information I obtained and then informed others so that they could be on guard. But sometimes, people who spoke the truth were the most annoying. Some people refuted or angrily criticized the opinions of others, But it wasn't just because they had their own opinions or had sufficient evidence. Instead, it was simply because they hated that person or that prophecy shattered their own expectations and affected their own interests. That was why the majority of true prophets and fortune tellers could only choose between the gallows or the stake. Although some people would probably regret not listening to the prophet's opinion at that time, and some might even try to punish the person who made such a ridiculous suggestion, what meaning would there be to the prophet and the calamity that had already occurred? Actually, being able to make prophecies and provide information support was already the limit of what an individual could do. Even I felt that I was doing quite well. You couldn't expect me to fight to the death against a country or even a world-class calamity by myself. Gathering information and planting seeds was normal. Revealing information when necessary, deceiving or inducing others to develop the situation in the direction I wanted was also normal. From a certain standpoint, I was fortunate. Although Emperor Yongya had a terrible reputation, the prophecy of an infamous demon king would always carry more weight than the prophecy of a nameless prophet. My numerous prophecies have been ominous. At first, I didn't believe them, but then I became doubtful. Now I was that damn crow's mouth, and let's hear who's the unlucky one this time. My hard work wasn't in vain. Perhaps it was only the seemingly unimportant information support. Only I, who knew the game's history, knew how much it changed. The early warning of the Holy War and the spying from the Chaos Abyss stopped the human countries from making trouble. The catastrophic human civil war in the game's history didn't occur. Due to a combination of factors and my guidance, the Underground World invasion was stopped right at the beginning. The entire Order faction didn't suffer too many casualties before the Holy War, which was much better than the game's history. As the Holy War progressed, more and more powerful enemies would appear, and the future would be impossible to see. All the leaders of the various countries would remember my previous prophecy. Maybe they still won't like me, but at least they will listen to what I have to say. The leaders of Bardi, the Mist Alliance, the Ottoman Empire, the Wood Spirits, the Mage Country, and so on had all signed this joint declaration. Cavendish and his companions had become public enemies of the entire world. Benefits would lead to strife, and strife was also for benefits. What benefits did Cavendish have? He wanted to open the dimensional door. In that case, the sealed cycle of reincarnation and the Holy War would become meaningless. The future of all life would become unknown. This sounded quite good, but the premise was that in the ancient era, Aichi had almost been destroyed by foreign invaders. Most propaganda and fairy tales would never mention what was outside. If it was mentioned, it would involve the dangerous dimensional invaders that attempted to destroy the world. However, as a spellcaster, reason and knowledge were the most fundamental weapons. It was meaningless to oppose for the sake of opposing. We can assume there's something out there. The most likely scenario would be the same as the ancient God Wars, where a group of hungry beasts were waiting for delicious food. In that case, the entire mortal plane would suffer a calamity. If we could survive it, Aichi's sealed natural cycle would be broken, and our world would be filled with the existence of multiple universes. This would be a good thing for the entire world of Aichi. The sealed path of evolution would be reopened, and technology, magic, and civilization would all develop explosively. If we couldn't survive it, actually, just like in the Chaos Abyss, where demons had invaded the mortal plane, there would probably still be some original inhabitants that would survive. However, it was unknown what would happen to the mortal plane, whether they would become slaves or food. But no matter if we could survive it or not, the powerless ordinary humans would likely suffer tremendous losses. Since the mortal plane had entered a natural cycle where the strong preyed on the weak, it was necessary to be prepared to be eliminated. I didn't know how many people would die in the mortal plane, but the ones who would die first and the most would definitely be the ones who didn't have the power or status to protect themselves. Of course, it was also possible that the hungry beasts had already left and there was nothing outside. That would be the equivalent of opening the door for nothing, and Cavendish would have done all this for nothing. The dimensional walls were jointly sealed by the two goddesses of order and chaos. Theoretically speaking, it would be impossible for the creatures of this world to leave. Don't ask me how Roland managed to leave, as he had done so many times in the past, far beyond the realm of theory. However, my unreliable cheat told me that the mortal plane had been sealed in order to guard against the outside world. It would still be possible to leave, but it would be impossible to enter again. If Cavendish had any information that could explain the situation outside, he would have shown it to me long ago in an attempt to convince me otherwise. I couldn't understand how Cavendish's noble goal would be able to benefit his companions in this situation. Yes, I was only referring to his allies and companions. I could understand Cavendish's goal, as his will would be unshakable. But what could he possibly give his subordinates and allies? A ticket to travel to the end of the world? In my opinion, it would be a ticket to the end of the world. A higher status and more money? Since the entire world could be destroyed, these things like status and money would become meaningless. More power? This would be somewhat meaningful, but didn't most people pursue power in order to have a better life? Besides, would the power given to them by a chaos-main god be able to help them survive the Armageddon? What meaning would power have if they didn't have it? I couldn't understand what Cavendish could possibly promise others. No matter what kind of alliance it was, the most important thing would be mutual benefits. But if an ally's benefits became murdering others, then this alliance would naturally become meaningless. It could be said that ever since Cavendish revealed and announced his goal, he had become the entire world's enemy. Ever since he learned of his goal, all of his allies had already betrayed him. Sophocles the Deceiver was carefully creating a fatal trap to kill him. His subordinates were probably also wavering. Apart from a pure lunatic, I couldn't understand why anyone else would continue to follow him. And since I was trying to make my position unclear, I had to stand against Roland, even if I had to kill my own kin. Is it worth it? Even if the entire world becomes his enemy, even if the entire world is destroyed, he still has to accomplish his goal? By the time we finished the meeting, everyone had grim expressions. It would seem that they now understood how dangerous Cavendish was. When I mentioned that I needed a fortune teller to help me find Roland, the Truth Symposium leaders instantly agreed. Not only would they send out the best fortune tellers and prophets, but they would also use the Mage Country's god equipment reserves and the Cloud Tower's mana ocean to uncover Cavendish and his scheme at all costs. The fairies immediately agreed that tomorrow, next week, and even next month, all the headlines would be about this news. The entire world would learn of Cavendish's evil deeds. Hallant promised that the dragons would pay close attention to this matter and pursue it to the end. Of course, there was something even more tangible. No matter if it was the dragons, mages, wood spirits, elves, or humans, all these proud and arrogant individuals promised me that as long as the situation was urgent, all I needed was a single notice, and they would seriously take action. That didn't sound like much. This was completely different from the usual battles where one would simply be a bystander on the battlefield. This was a battle where one would have to risk their lives. Normally, when level 4 individuals from different countries fought, unless there was a special reason, as long as the difference in power wasn't too great, there would usually be no fatalities. After living for so long, they were all old foxes. They would always hold something back, even if it wasn't important. They wouldn't use forbidden spells, and they would only use powerful ultimate techniques. They would fight until their mana reserves reached more than half, and they would use up more than half of their items. Then, they would say their goodbyes and go home. The most obvious and shameless example would probably be the previous battle between the undead emperors and the True Symposium. Both sides had top-level mages, and they had more than 10 top-level mages fighting for almost half a year. Yet, there were no fatalities at all. No matter how beautiful the battle was, the fact that there were no corresponding fatalities or battle results was the best explanation. But since the undead emperor's scheme had succeeded, there would be no future for them. This gave the undead emperors a reason to risk their lives. The power they could use would be immeasurable. It could be said that I, who had originally been weak, now had countless people supporting me. Meanwhile, Cavendish, who had originally been strong, was gradually becoming a loner. As I expected, the next morning, the calamity rankings were updated. Cavendish, who didn't have many combat achievements in the mortal plane, instantly skyrocketed to the top. He kicked aside the Mega Nightmare, who who had been at the top of the calamity rankings for more than half a year and directly reached the top. But when I took a closer look at the calamity rankings, my mood became quite terrible. Didn't your ranking drop by 1 spot? Why are you so unhappy? Could it be that you want to reach the top of the calamity rankings? But that wasn't the only thing that made me unhappy. It's fine if they insist that I'm dangerous and don't take me off the calamity rankings. It's fine if they don't discuss with me and give me a new title. But why does Cavendish have the title of Chaos Destroyer as soon as he gets on the calamity rankings, while I have the strange titles of Calamity Harbinger of the Dark Knight and Calamity Bird of Death? What's the meaning of these shameful titles? What nonsense is this? This doesn't seem like a fairy style. Let me see. Calamity Harbinger of the Dark Knight, Calamity Bird of Death. Oh, I get it. The first part is black, and the last part is bird. This is calling you a jinx. What? These bastards. I'm going to tear down their newspaper right now. Chapter 753. In legends, the weather would often be used to foretell the upcoming plot. A sunny day would be a great day for heroes to set out on their journeys. An ancient castle covered in dark clouds would become a symbol of a conspiracy. That would be the climax of the plot, and there would always be a few thunderbolts on a sunny day, even if there were no clouds in the sky. Reality, however, wasn't so dramatic. Carnage would often occur under the blazing sun, because that was the time when the field of view would be at its best. The true conspirators would often live in beautiful manners, and there wouldn't be much chaos even when the weather was at its worst. Everyone would stay in their own warm homes. But sometimes, ordinary people didn't have much of a choice in certain situations. For us, who were full of ambition, we met with the worst of luck. There would always be a lot of rain at the intersection of spring and summer. Barty's rainy season was about to begin, and we were heading to the place where Dragon Knight Emperor Howland had made his fortune, the Rainy Night Fortress. Dark clouds shrouded the sky above us. The sudden gale and torrential rain not only obstructed our advance, but also obscured our vision. It had already been a week since we left the Barty capital. The Allied army, with Barty as the main force, had grandly begun their second undead subjugation campaign. Less than 2 days into the journey, the weather became terrible. The torrential rain greatly slowed down the army's progress. The mages were unable to detect any mysterious power from the dark clouds. In that case, it could only be that their luck was terrible. Normally, knight and nobles didn't need to care about their image, but on the battlefield, military orders were absolute. Their lives were quite uncomfortable. The golden armored warriors at the very front of the army were usually quite impressive. Under the sunlight, they looked just like gold warriors. Their weapons and armor were all enchanted with adamantite. Not only were their weapons and armor coated with adamantite, they were also worth far more than the same amount of gold, allowing them to ignore ordinary arrows. Their standard weapons were a heavy spear that was nearly 2 meters long and a tower shield that was also coated with expensive adamantite. They were also enchanted by a master-level mage. The spear had the glow of sharpness and armor penetration. The thick tower shield had the glow of magic resistance and sturdiness. The tip of the spear was covered in spiral-shaped magical runes, and the cross-line emblem on the tower shield was a gift from the royal family. Just this spear and shield alone would be enough for an ordinary mercenary to work hard for their entire life. The ugly dragon helmet only revealed its eyes. The adamantine plate armor made it even sturdier than the mountain giant's armor. The armor was a classic example of wind armor. The only decorations on the armor were dragon scales that could be used as horns and spikes. The Imperial Dragon Cavalry was the name of this troop. Although it was very familiar, it had a long history. It had been called that way back then, and it had been passed down. Even though they had dragon riders in their name, don't misunderstand. They were pure infantry. The weight of their armor was something not even a tamed young earth dragon could endure. The fact that these warriors were able to wield such equipment could only mean that these warriors were exceedingly powerful. Their average combat level was sufficiently high. 10 years ago, this was a terrifying group of gold pinnacle existences. One extra job explains their uniqueness. They are part of the Royal Knight Regiment. Every country's Royal Knight squadrons had always been the signature and strongest military branch of any country. These Royal Knight squadrons were tightly controlled by the royalty. They served as bodyguards as well as the sharpest blade against rebels and foreign enemies. Bardi's strongest military branch was obviously the Dragon Knight squadrons. However, the Royal Dragon Knight squadrons of 13,000 wouldn't even fear a Dragon Knight squadron at all. Why was it one of the strongest? Unlike the Ottoman Empire, which was still in the process of creating its own new Royal Knight squadrons, and unlike the Mist Kingdom, which used a mix of random troops to act as the face of the royal family, the ancient Bardi Empire had plenty of resources. The Dragon King's shield, Bardi's wings, and Milan's whip, the three major Royal Knight squadrons, were at the peak of the human world in terms of history, power, and even individual power. Yep, that was only in the human world. After all, the Bardi Empire had the Dragon Knight squadrons. It would be unfair to compare dragons' average combat strength to mortals. However, the Dragon Knight squadrons were the strongest of the three major Royal Knight squadrons, the Bardi's wings. Being able to stand on equal footing with the Dragon Knight squadrons, and the fact that the prideful dragons didn't provoke the Dragon Knight squadrons out of displeasure was already proof of the other two Royal Knight squadrons' confidence. Humans' advantage lay in the balance between quantity and quality. In other words, the so-called mass production of troops. Elven archers and mages usually had vastly different abilities. With enough time, they all had their own specialties. Being able to fight on their own was their specialty. Meanwhile, human warriors would only have several years or even several decades of training. However, as long as they followed the path that had been repeatedly proven by their predecessors, their growth rate would be several times faster than that of other species. Although human warriors would be free-range compared to other species' warriors, their abilities would be rather simple. However, with special equipment that made up for their weaknesses and increased their advantages, they wouldn't be much weaker than other species' 100-year-old warriors on the battlefield. At the very least, even the dwarves' most elite 100-year-old braided warriors wouldn't dare to charge head-on against the Bardi Empire's Royal Dragon Knights. The Royal Dragon Knights had excellent defense and attack power, as well as elite warriors that were 1 in 10,000. This made these sluggish heavy tanks invulnerable and bloodthirsty meat grinders the moment they got close to them. Custom-made martial techniques and cultivation paths, custom-made, superior equipment, and the tactics that were exchanged for experience and lessons were the reason why humans were able to mass-produce powerful troops. Perhaps using the term mass production to describe this might be belittling, but using the term inheritance would be the same. The refinement and purification of armor technology, the enchantment of magic alchemy, and the accumulation of countless processes, technologies, and industries resulted in the royal armor, the silver horse armor, and the windchaser javelins. The inheritance of martial arts and combat tactics was even more direct and obvious. Teachers would teach their disciples, and it would be passed down from generation to generation. The seniors of the Knight Squadron would record their combat experience, their proud martial arts, and their understanding of using weapons. Those that were worth promoting would be widely spread. Then, the younger generation would use the seniors' ultimate skills as a foundation to learn and create new ultimate skills. As it was passed down from generation to generation, this troop type, the Knight Squadron, would naturally become stronger and stronger. The longer a Knight Squadron's history was, the more powerful the martial arts passed down would be. It wasn't that they had some ancient secret technique or ultimate skill. Rather, it was that through the tempering of time and actual combat, the originally crude martial arts would become skillful and abnormally practical. All sorts of auxiliary cultivation methods would be figured out by others, and the Bardi Empire Squadron would walk the pure path of kings. Techniques that were figured out by oneself in the deep mountains and forests might seem perfect and extravagant, but in actual combat, they would be far inferior to simple combat techniques that had been thoroughly tempered. This was what inheritance was, learning from generation to generation, and the younger generation would step on the shoulders of the older generation to continue advancing. Naturally, they would become stronger and stronger. It was said that the Golden Royal Dragon Knight Squadron's history was as long as the Bardi Empire's. Every centurion would have the title of a knight that could be passed down. If a centurion died in the line of duty, their children could choose to inherit the centurion's noble title and position. It was possible for one set of armor to be passed down for 7 or 8 generations, having been repaired and improved by countless grandmasters. Young members of the Royal Dragon Knight Squadron would know what type of person they wanted to become. They would learn how to use a spear at 3 years old and learn how to use a shield at 5 years old. Only after many rounds of selection would they be qualified to become a Golden Dragon Knight. A spear and a shield, one for offense and one for defense. It was simple, but it was a demonstration of true martial arts. Out of all the high-level troops, the Royal Dragon Knight Squadron had the least and simplest equipment. However, as the Dragon King's shield that protected the entire Bardi Empire and the Milan royalty, the Royal Dragon Knight Squadron was one of the top 10 human knight squadrons in both history and power. In this generation, the Royal Dragon Knight Squadron even faintly showed signs of challenging the Bardi Empire's #1 knight squadron, the Bardi Wings. Of course, this was the Royal Dragon Knight Squadron from 10 years ago. Out of the Bardi Empire's 3 main Royal Knight Squadrons, the Bardi Wings of the Dragon Knight Squadron was only a part of the Royal Guards in name. The Milan Whip, which consisted entirely of cavalry, had been assigned to defend the borders and invade the Bardi Empire. It was impossible for the Royal Dragon King's Shield Squadron to be sent out to defend the capital. They were the Emperor's most trustworthy trump card. This time, it could be said that Halent was using everything he had. Out of a total of 13,000 soldiers, 11,000 had come to the Bardi Empire. Only the most basic veteran instructors and trainees from the past 3 months were left behind. Even new soldiers who had completed their first year of training had come. It could be said that the Bardi Empire had come in full force. The grand formation of heavy infantry walked on the road without making a single sound. There was only the sound of heavy footsteps. Fight to the death. Don't retreat. This was their battle declaration, as well as their usual style of fighting. For them, only by retreating would their battle formation fall into chaos and expose their weaknesses. As long as they didn't retreat and their formation didn't fall into chaos, even if they died, their comrades would take revenge for them. Their uniform footsteps combined into a single, frightening sound that was like a group of titans silently advancing. But at this moment, due to their past training and strict military discipline, the Royal Dragon Knights appeared to be in the most pitiful state. The sudden torrential rain made it so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. However, the experienced Royal Dragon Knights didn't lose their composure at all. They continued to do their best to maintain their formation in the rain, one after another without falling into chaos. Their extraordinarily heavy armor also made them extraordinarily heavy. Every step they took in the mud was quite uncomfortable. If they could barely endure this, the next one would be even more unbearable. The rain was far too heavy. Water entered the armor through all the cracks and air holes, filling up the armor, and then flowed out through the cracks. Yep, it was just like a sprinkler that sprayed water everywhere they walked. I really want to dub their voices. What should I do? For example, the classic song, "A Good Life is Blessed Every Morning." Endure it. Otherwise, you'll be dragged out and beaten to death. I didn't know what they were feeling right now, but I felt quite uncomfortable wearing overalls that were filled with water. My entire body was filled with metal cans, filled with water, and I still had to carry the metal cans while walking in formation. Even if I swayed, I couldn't fall over. Just thinking about it made me feel a chill. Harloise, do you think that if I toss a piece of soap, no, a banana slice in front of their formation, and 1 or 2 of them fall over, would they be able to cause a large group of them to fall over like bowling pins? It's useless. Their boots are all enchanted with acceleration and anti-skid. But with how heavy the rain is, it's hard to say. You can really try it. If you fall over now, you probably won't be able to get up again. Dying to a banana peel would be far too amusing. Oh, right, you can ask Johnny, the omnipotent crate, for a day off. His favorite spell is to modify the original grease spell into a malicious, AoE banana peel spell. Although I knew that mages would be more bored than anyone else when they had nothing better to do, Johnny was truly free to the point of using his free time to create such a spell. Unlike the Bardi army, which cared more about their reputation than anything else, I was currently with the mage country's mages. I was drinking coffee as I watched the army march in the rain. In order to preserve the mage's unreliable stamina stat, it was an unspoken rule of the battlefield. No matter where the mages went, as long as the conditions weren't too harsh, they would be treated better than horse carriages. The rain was so heavy that it was difficult to see anything clearly. The mages unhesitatingly stopped and sat in their horse carriages to watch the rest of the army march. Drinking tea, drinking coffee, and chatting was already quite good. Some mages directly started playing Gwent cards, while others started experimenting with seemingly powerful spells. Some archmages who were skilled in spatial magic directly opened up teleportation portals and escaped. There were also some who summoned beasts and started performing with beasts. Although their performances were quite normal, I felt like their eyes were rather familiar. Perhaps they were another Bayphone worshipper. Perhaps we should approach them from behind, drag them out, and beat them to death. Military honor? Military rules? Mages had long since gotten used to ignoring such rules. If this army only consisted of the Bardi Empire, or if it was an alliance between the Bardi Empire and the Mage Country, the Bardi Royal Dragon Knights wouldn't have been so stubborn. Everyone knew that getting soaked in the rain and exercising so much would likely result in catching cold. But sometimes, military honor was all that mattered, especially when it came to so-called allies who were secretly competing with each other. Not far away from the Golden Heavy Infantry, there was also a group of soldiers slowly advancing. It was as if they were naturally competing with the Golden Dragon Knights. The Golden Dragon Knights were Golden Heavy Infantry, while the soldiers were Silver Light Cavalry. The Royal Dragon Knights walked the path of simplicity, but the Light Cavalry's equipment was ridiculously complex. The Ottoman Empire is so rich. The White Wolf Guards have all changed their equipment again. The White Wolf Guards were the Ottoman Empire's Royal Knight. They were also the Ottoman Empire's trump card to surpass the other mega empires. Back in the day, the White Wolf Guards' armor was made of a Mislar mithril alloy. Although it was rather light, it was more powerful than ordinary heavy armor. Not only that, it was also highly resistant to magic. Back in the day, not to mention the blueprint for light cavalry armor, even the recipe for the alloy itself was a top-secret secret of the Ottoman Empire. You still managed to scam me. Cough, cough, how can this be called scam? This is just a military exchange. How can a normal military exchange be called scam? Back in the day, the White Wolf Guards' Mislar explosive dragon spears, explosive javelins, and explosive swords were all incredibly high-quality alchemy equipment. Just from their names, it was obvious that these weapons were explosive. A single White Wolf Knight was like a mobile gunpowder warehouse. They were the crystallization of the Ottoman Empire's highly advanced alchemy technology. If the Royal Dragon Knights were legendary warriors that walked out of ancient epics, then the White Wolf Guards were a new troop type that kept up with the times. Compared to back in the day, their equipment was greatly upgraded. Only a few of the most advanced Knight Guards were equipped with long, explosive dragon spears. Their javelins and long swords were completely different. At the very least, judging from the obvious Olivia's magic box, I could see traces of magical engineering. Every single one of the White Wolf Guards was carrying at least 3 backpacks. Small bags had obvious magical wavelengths, which were probably new toys. However, the greatest change was in their mounts. The originally powerful mutant war horses were directly abandoned. All the Knight Guards were now equipped with iron horses. Although the White Wolf Guards were a troop type that relied on alchemy equipment and potions to fight, and didn't rely on their mounts to begin with, it was truly unexpected for them to be so resolute in abandoning their regular mounts. While the Royal Dragon Knights' heavy footsteps were silent, the White Wolf Guards' engines never stopped revving. If that was all, I wouldn't have been so astonished. Between the iron horses, there was also an iron tortoise that was slowly moving forward. This iron tortoise was approximately 3 meters long and had 5 wheels of various sizes. Its thick iron armor protected the fragile, heavy cannons and crossbowmen. Although the Iron Tortoise's speed was rather slow, I found at least 4 cannon ports on the Iron Tortoise. This must be a tank. Although it was rather crude, I could guarantee that this design concept was no different from the very first tanks. Both iron horses were equipped with an iron armor, so that people could safely attack from within. I wasn't so bored as to give any suggestions or ideas. No matter which world the White Wolf Guards were from, their intelligence couldn't be underestimated. With the Iron Horse's engine technology, others would naturally be able to develop their own mechanical tanks. Not to mention, tanks in this generation hadn't been eliminated from history to begin with. The Ottoman Empire's fearsome shipbuilding and alchemy industries were more than capable of turning any ridiculous idea into reality. There were many of these Iron Tortoise tanks. Every 10 Night Guards was equipped with one Iron Tortoise tank. Apart from that, there were also large objects that were being dragged by horse carriages. I couldn't see what they were because they were covered in oiled paper, but I guessed that they were also powerful weapons. The Bardi Empire had inherited a long history and was working hard to innovate. The Ottoman Empire had started off as a nouveau riche, but was able to take advantage of the Industrial Revolution to rapidly develop. Both sides had long since been competing against each other. Now that the Bardi Empire's Royal Knight squadrons, which represented all sorts of honors, met, they naturally began to compete against each other. Even modern machines would likely have problems in bad weather, not to mention the Ottoman Empire's half-finished products. On the way here, I personally saw 3 Iron Tortoise tanks start to emit smoke and die. Some directly broke down, and there were even more Iron Tortoises that couldn't get up. In the end, many Iron Tortoises were dragged away by multiple White Wolf Knight squadrons. Neither side said anything, but everyone knew that they were already competing against each other. It was a competition to see who would be the first to lose their patience and shout for them to stop. Soldiers. I could only helplessly shake my head. It wouldn't be easy for me to deal with them as a guest soldier. Since I was still quite far away from the battlefield, I might as well let them have their fun. Honestly, they're already so old, yet they're still fighting like children. If the undead come at this time, won't things get out of hand? All right, Harloise, put down that eggplant, and I'll shut up. Enemy ambush. A piercing scream shattered the silence. I silently took the eggplant from Harloise and stuffed it into my mouth. Chapter 754. When fighting against the undead, especially against the Calamity army led by an undead lord, you can never rely on so-called common sense. They can easily ambush you at a time and place you've never expected. Great rivers and oceans are their natural cover. Snowy mountains, which are forbidden to all living creatures, are completely useless against them. Sandstorms in the desert will only affect their performance. Sigh, you're quite right. That strategist said that? Yep, the great strategist Roland said it. It's from my diary from 300 years ago. This was still human territory. It would seem that not only had information been leaked, but the undead had also prepared a trap. Ear-piercing screams still echoed in my ears. The mages who had taken off their clothes and boots were all in a chaotic mess. It was understandable that everyone else was panicking. Being ambushed by an enemy ambush in the middle of a torrential downpour would be quite a bad situation. However, only Harloise and I continued to leisurely drink our hot coffee and chat. We had no intention of leaving our comfortable horse carriage. This wasn't because we were confident in our ability to remain unharmed under the undead's ambush. It was because we were one of the few undead mages here, so we had more or less figured out the enemy's military strength. No matter how the undead had managed to fool our senses and scouts, it was impossible for them to hide their army's strength once they truly attacked. Low-level undead would be unable to escape from an undead Emperor Soli, since mid-level and high-level undead would be able to command low-level undead through their souls. It would be a basic skill for any undead lord to figure out how strong the enemy's army was. The moment an undead lord entered battle, the soul network he used to command his subordinates would instantly expose his location. Of course, he could also choose to hide, but the undead army's power level would greatly decrease without him controlling it. 6 undead lords. 3 are in the air, Two are following behind, and only one is charging at the front. There's less than 20,000 undead lords in total. More than 70% of them are skeletons and ghouls that have just recently been transformed. Isn't it too obvious that they're trying to test us? The undead army's numbers were always quite frightening. Other species would go bankrupt trying to gather an army of 100,000 or even 1,000,000, but the undead could easily gather several million. But in comparison, low-level undead were incredibly weak. A sea of skeletons without a mid-level commander would only be pure cannon fodder that could only exhaust the enemy's stamina and mana. It would be best to bring more than 10 times the number of undead to challenge another species' army. The heavy rain still affected your senses. There's another one underground. Hearing Harlowe say this, I felt that it was rather funny. I had already sensed it long ago, but I hadn't considered it as an enemy. That one should be something like a death lurker spider. Although burying himself first and waiting for others to come to him before floating up to launch a sneak attack is indeed a good strategy. It seems like his luck isn't too good. After hearing my words, Harloes continued to perceive the divine light with a skeptical look before sighing subtly. The place where the ambusher was buried wasn't far away from us. It was the place where the dragon knights had just passed by. The hole that the ambusher had dug had been trampled on, and the rainwater and mud had poured in. Then, it had been repeatedly crushed by the infantry squads that were acting like road rollers. It was likely that the ambusher would never be able to come out again. And why do we know this? What a spineless junior. The battle hasn't even begun yet, and he's already screaming for help. The undead's unique soul waves were spreading. The undead lord-level ambusher that had been trampled on was screaming for help. It probably hadn't expected that while it was digging a hole to hide itself, it would encounter a troop of road rollers passing by. Not only that, it had to wait for its companions to surround it. It could only forcefully endure the pain as it watched the undead above its head trample on it. It was likely that its emotions were quite complex at the time. Even though we were in a state of war, our side was still rather relaxed. The rain outside was far too heavy. The sound of water droplets hitting the ground echoed throughout the city. Apart from the occasional sound of explosions, there wasn't even the sound of weapons clashing or the angry shouts of the commanders. The rain was far too heavy. Visibility was less than 50 meters, and it was difficult to hear anything clearly. At this time, it was impossible to count on the commanders. It was all up to the individual soldiers. From a certain standpoint, it was fortunate that our enemies were the undead army, which was quite easy to distinguish. Otherwise, it was quite likely that we would accidentally kill our allies. But from another standpoint, if our enemies weren't the undead, they wouldn't have chosen this time to attack us. Our ears and eyes were blocked, and our command system was crippled. No matter how organized the undead army was, they could only fight on their own. Meanwhile, most undead didn't even use their 5 senses to sense the world. Their command system was based on the soul language, so they wouldn't be affected by the rain at all. I could sense that the Royal Dragon Knights on the front lines were already fighting against the undead army. However, the rain blocked all senses. Unless we went closer to investigate the situation, we could only passively wait for the result. This soundless battle was currently going on. The archmages in our luxurious carriage all exchanged glances. In the end, they all sat down. Not a single one of them intended to go out by themselves to save the undead. The heavy rain would also be troublesome for mages. It was possible for them to make mistakes in casting spells and casting spells. But the worst part would be that their senses would be greatly reduced. Since they were ambushed, the danger level would skyrocket. Worrying that the heavy rain would give the assassins an opportunity to take advantage of was one thing. The main reason was that they didn't want to volunteer to work for Emperor Barty and risk their lives. Every country had their own ways of using mages. However, in normal situations, mages wouldn't be in charge of military affairs. Even if they were in charge of troops, they would have a full-time military officer assigned to them. Only when they needed the assistance of magic power would they request the assistance of an archmage. This was a clear indication of the difference in power between the two sides. Not only that, the mage country and I were both guest armies. Attacking first without the host's permission would be a violation of the unwritten rules of alliance warfare. Right now, it was likely that the Bardi Empire would have to personally send someone to ask the mage country's archmages to help out. However, it was one thing for the Bardi Empire to send someone over. It was also quite possible that the Bardi Empire didn't want to lose face by asking an ally to help out. The chaotic battle outside was still going on. I was still doing my best to sense the situation outside. The mages continued playing around and doing whatever they were doing. However, this time, they obediently put on their mage robes and picked up their staffs, ready to join the battle at any moment. One's missing. Soon, I sensed that a gargoyle lord in the air had become a thing of the past after a magical explosion. Dragon breath? It's just a bunch of skeletons. The Bardi Empire has already sent out multiple Dragon Knight warriors. I was rather worried as I looked at the heavy rain outside. If such a perfect timing for an ambush wasn't a coincidence, then there really was a huge problem here. Chapter 755. Even though it was still afternoon, it was still pitch black outside. Human warriors were dying every second. In such an extreme environment, the Royal Dragon Knights and White Wolf Guard's power levels would be severely reduced. Something's wrong with this rain. The first to approach me was the familiar Gandalf. No, it was my shameless junior brother Cade. Although I had come all the way here, I hadn't interacted with anyone in the Cloud Tower for the past 100 years, so there was still some estrangement between me and the mages of the new generation. Most of those old mages had deep thoughts and liked to stay put. As long as it wasn't necessary, they could sit together for several months without speaking. Although Cade seemed rather mature, fine, he was actually quite old. His cheeky and shameless personality was indeed an excellent lubricant. This was especially so for archmages like Cade, who were all sharp-edged. Having such a friendly and easygoing senior was far too great a boon for them. And now, Cade was also my channel of communication with the mages of the Truth Symposium. Harloise? I've never seen her before. That big elf who was being flattered and flattered by the archmages to the point that she was the third stage queen wasn't my cat at all. Cough, cough. Getting back to the main topic, although I was also an undead emperor, why was Harloise so well-liked and respected, while I was silently forgotten in a corner? This appearance? It's because you're not a girl. It's not like you're gay. Who would want to flatter a man? All right then, Cade, you actually dared to tell me the truth. You'd better be careful of my arrows in the back later. Although we were still chatting idly, we had come to a mutual understanding about the current situation. No matter if this rain was coincidental or intentional by a high-level mage, this rain was far too disadvantageous for the human side. Although I still didn't think that such a powerful army would be able to completely wipe out our allied army. Such heavy losses at the very beginning would be a tremendous blow to morale. Is there any way to dispel it? A water element archmage? My doubts were met with a shake of the head, as I expected. Mages had their limits as well. It wouldn't be difficult to summon a dark cloud to rain, but only a water element archmage or a high-level droll would be able to do it. However, the dark clouds created by magical elements were very easy to disperse, and the rainfall would not be too much. However, if they were to cancel out the already existing downpour, it would be a little unreasonable because it was a natural phenomenon that already existed. Canceling out or erasing a natural phenomenon was equivalent to going against nature and the basic order of this world. There's not enough time. As super spellcasters, we still had ways to deal with even natural disasters. However, no matter if it was forbidden spells or ritualistic magic, they all required time to prepare. We didn't have enough time right now. I could feel my life slipping away at every moment. The elite of elite soldiers had actually died at the hands of a bunch of skeleton cannon fodder. They would probably feel quite aggrieved. Masters, His Majesty requests your help to disperse the rain. Finally, Halen's messenger arrived. Although it was a little late, nobody had the heart to scold the messenger when they saw his blood-stained body. Before he arrived, the mages had already begun their preparations. Fire magic, the opposite of water magic. Do you think our people are not dying fast enough? In the opposite direction, the water element is the extension of the ice element. Try freezing the rain. Will the heavy rain turn into a large-scale icicle or a blizzard? Your lethality has doubled. You are a genius. Just use earth magic to create a wall to block the rain. Fine, I'll shut up. Sometimes, having too many mages was a problem as well. Whenever a plan was proposed, it would immediately be rejected. If there were only a few archmages, it was likely that they would attack first before doing anything else. It would be great if there was an anti-knight. Are you an idiot? They're only capable of dispelling magic and divine power. How are they supposed to dispel such a natural phenomenon? I shook my head. If this was any other time, I would have been in the mood to continue chatting and see what plan they would come up with in the end. Stalling for time would also allow me to see what other trump cards our allies had up their sleeves. I was quite curious as to why Hallant was so confident in suppressing everyone else. But right now, I could sense a large individual looking down at us from the sky. If the probing attack was effective, then this probing attack would likely become a full-scale attack. Yet another undead emperor? Such violent and restless mana fluctuations. It's actually an undead mage? Is this the undead Emperor Shupness from the Death Fog plane? The restless power of death stirred restlessly in the dark night. Numerous chains of death power were being created. Shupness probably hadn't expected that his probing attack would have such a good result. He was currently gathering his undead army. As long as this situation continued, he would be prepared to launch an all-out attack. This was a million-strong undead army. If all of them attacked, it would definitely become a full-scale chaotic battle. It would truly be difficult to determine the victor in a short period of time. And if it became a large-scale chaotic battle, individual powerful individuals like us would be useless. It would be impossible to use large-scale forbidden spells, nor would we have anywhere to throw them. The only use we would have would be to gang up on an undead emperor. That would be too much of a trap. I chose to give up. Holy light, your enemy is right before me. I shall bestow upon him the light of purification. Pure holy light, please deceive me. The archmages all looked at me as if I had seen a ghost. I put my palms together and sincerely knelt down to pray to the holy light. A pair of faintly discernible wings of light flashed behind his back, and he directly stepped out of the luxurious carriage and joined the torrent of battle. Did you hear that? He's really summoning the holy light? That light is so blinding. He really is a holy knight. Most mages would probably find it inconceivable that I, an undead mage, was skilled in the holy light. I was intentionally putting on a show for them. As for my goal, I would probably only reveal it when the time was right. At that time, the Holy Church is going to suffer yet again? Harloise had guessed quite quickly. I was unable to understand how she had guessed it. Every time you have anything to do with the holy light, aren't you always dragging the Holy Church down? I was rendered speechless. From a certain standpoint, this was indeed the case. Every time I improved in the path of holy light, it was naturally a step back for the Holy Church's authority. And this would be the last time I would cause trouble for the Holy Church. This wasn't a death flag. It was just that as long as I succeeded this time, there would be no need for me to cause trouble for the Holy Church in the future. Everything before me was pitch black, and I actually felt a faint pain from the torrential rain. It was fortunate that the mortal warriors were able to endure such abnormal weather. I took a deep breath as I half knelt in the muddy water. I opened my palms, causing my flashing dawn sword to suddenly float in midair. The flashing holy light seed slowly burned within, just like a lighthouse's fire. Holy light, I praise you. You bring hope to those who are lost in the darkness and give direction to those who are lost. Although I was muttering a prayer filled with honorifics and praise, I wasn't praising the God of holy light like an ordinary priest would. Instead, I was explaining my understanding and gratitude towards the holy light. That's right, gratitude. Humans had grown from weak to strong, from barbarians in uncivilized lands to dominating the entire world. It was undeniable that the Holy Light and the Holy Light job class members had sacrificed themselves, praying for light in the darkness to bring order to the land of chaos. Why wouldn't I be grateful? As I prayed, my dawn sword slowly rose into the air, just like the rising sun. If Dawn sword form against Sophocles the Deceiver was a gathering of light, then my Dawn sword's lighthouse form was a scattering of light. At this moment, the entire battlefield paused for 1 second. No matter if it was undead or humans, they all instinctively looked in my direction. That was because a new sun was slowly rising. Pure holy light, this new type of holy light, had revealed its complete form for the first time in front of everyone. When the intelligent undead and demon lords discovered that this sun was actually glowing with holy light, they all furiously retreated. They were unable to understand how holy light, which had such a short range, was able to illuminate the entire battlefield. But then, they discovered that this light wasn't as scary as they had expected. When it shone on their bodies, it didn't directly burn or ignite their bodies like holy light would. Instead, it was rather warm and comfortable, making them want to shine on it more. Wait a moment, something's wrong. We can actually sense the temperature. Only at this moment did the intelligent undead discover that something was wrong with the situation. This positive holy light didn't directly harm them. Instead, it was gradually corroding and erasing their negative energy. Compared to the original holy light's holy light, this pure holy light's attack power was far weaker. However, even the strongest holy light priest had only been able to use holy light to cover a radius of several hundred meters. Meanwhile, this holy light sun was able to illuminate the entire battlefield. The human warriors also felt warm. Their wounds were actually slowly healing, and while they were fighting, they discovered to their delight that their enemies were becoming weaker and weaker. This pure holy light was a combat mode specially prepared for the battlefield. It would buff creatures of order in a large area, while weakening demons and undead in a large area. This pure holy light didn't have much attack power at first, but it was different from the original holy light's holy light, which could only be used once. This pure holy light used up very little energy and could shine like a lighthouse. As long as the battle dragged on long enough, the undead lords would also be weakened and ignited. Of course, this wasn't without side effects. Kill him. A berserk soul voice echoed throughout the world. At this moment, all the zombies, skeletons, abominations, and bone dragons all looked at me. Countless willow, the wisps lit up in their originally lifeless eye sockets as all the undead locked onto me. What surprised me was that the screams of pain were coming from within the dark clouds. Not only that, the pure holy light was actually dispelling the dark clouds and torrential rain. Pure holy light had the ability to purify the power of chaos. The scenery before me was obviously abnormal. In that case, there could only be one explanation. These dark clouds are actually some undead's physical body. So this is an undead emperor's true body. They really know how to play. However, I wasn't as relaxed as I appear to be. Everyone else was taunting the entire battlefield, while I was taunting the entire battlefield. Everyone else was pulling the aggro of 2 monsters at once, while I was pulling the aggro of several tens of thousands at once. And there was no meat shield in front of me that could block the undead enemies for me. I hesitated for a moment, but finally decided to continue maintaining the pure holy light sun. After all, not only was it providing the most important support and illumination to the entire battlefield, it was also attacking the enemy leaders. Now, it would be a matter of who could last longer. I believe that since I had demonstrated my usefulness, the others would help me block the undead. What if they couldn't block the undead? This problem was actually quite easy to deal with. When the time came for me to be surrounded, all I had to do was stop taunting, pack up, and run. Halent, take your people and help me block the undead. Otherwise, I'll be able to escape at any moment. That was what Harloise told me. If I won, I would definitely not admit that I had done so. If I lost, what would be the point if I didn't admit it? Chapter 756. There were 2 types of people who would use their ultimate attack without saying a word on the battlefield. The first type would be newbies who actively sought death. They would want everyone's attention to them, and then instantly die as expected. The second type would be veterans who acted cool and then ran away. I meant those who were confident enough to suppress the entire battlefield and dared to show off their strength. Dawn of holy light illuminated the entire battlefield. This was a tactical weapon specially prepared for the cruel holy war. It had a large AoE, powerful buff effects, long duration, low energy consumption, and many other advantages. Although it was only effective against the undead and demons, this was completely acceptable compared to its advantages. The only flaw was that it's just a bit of a taunt. The first to arrive were a bone dragon and two small squads of gargoyles. Barty's Dragon Knight and Griffin Knight hadn't been able to successfully block all of the undead aerial troops. If this had been in the past, I would have needed some time to deal with such high-level opponents. But now Holy Light. I softly chanted a praise for Holy Light, causing my dawn sword to shine with even more blinding holy light. But this time, it was a concentrated beam of light. 1, 2, 10, 100. The sky was filled with traces of golden light beams. The flying units of the undead only realized that they had been attacked after they were destroyed. Although I had to maintain my dawn sword, that didn't mean that I was completely defenseless. Light moved in my hands. Every time I clicked and moved, a beam of light would shoot toward a target. Streaks of light appeared to prove the effect of the attack. The target of each streak of light was a high-level flying undead. 1 to 71. Prediction, aim, and hit. With my Dawn Sword's Lighthouse of Holy Light, cannon, mode, the battle became a simple point-and-click game. My attack speed surpassed my reaction speed, and all the flying undead that were hit directly fell to the ground. Streaks of light formed a net of light. Golden explosions kept occurring in the sky, creating the most beautiful fireworks. There was no space to pass through this fatal net of fire. This was probably the easiest battle I had ever experienced. I instantly killed off several hundred high-level undead. Although this was a delightful result, I had no intentions of chasing them to the end. The energy consumption is far too high. In just a short half a minute, I had used up a total of 320 holy light beams. The result was that Dawn's holy light had been directly used up by a third. If I used it 2 more times, Dawn's holy light would probably die. From a certain standpoint, Dawn was a part of my body. I felt rather weak after using up more than 1/3 of my holy light power in an instant. But I had achieved my goal. The first wave of undead ambushes was completely wiped out. With this time difference, the humans were able to catch their breath. The thorny forest in front of me was filled with man-eating flower warriors, one after another, crawling out of the thorny forest. The royal dragon cavalry followed the Dragon Knight and stood in front of me. The slowly rising sun dispelled all darkness. My understanding of chaos and my pursuit of holy light allowed me to create this sword that was the natural enemy of chaos. Pure holy light, please grant me the power to dispel that darkness. I knelt on one knee and prayed devoutly. I hypnotized myself to strengthen my connection and compatibility with the holy light. The elemental tide in the surroundings began to surge and gather even more light. The holy light sun in the sky began to shine once more. This is too exaggerated. His holy light reserves and affinity to holy light are far superior to Pope Colomus. Back in the day, there was a good reason why I had been called the illegitimate child of the holy light. My holy light affinity, which was unscientific to begin with, had evolved to the extreme with the help of the Arbiter's angelic power. Holy light, how is this possible? Blasphemer. At this time, even the most devout believer of the God of holy light would doubt their own faith. The wings of light on her back unfurled. These were the wings of light of the war angel. Countless specks of light gathered on the wings at a rate visible to the naked eye. This elemental affinity for summoning holy light was something that even the highest level angels couldn't compare to. I was a heretic that the Holy Church viewed as an evil heretic, yet I was actually such a powerful user of holy light. The Holy Church's belief that if you devout believe in the God of holy light, the God will bestow power upon your devout believers became nothing more than a joke. Why does this method of using holy light seem so much like magic? Don't be ridiculous. Do you want to go to trial for heresy? There's no mistaking it. He's using the same method of controlling the elements to control holy light. There's no prayer, no religious hymns, not even a connection to divine power. The Archmage's discussions echoed in my ears. After I demonstrated my method of using holy light at such a close distance, they would likely treat holy light in a different way starting from today. This was exactly what I wanted to see. The rain suddenly stopped. The dark clouds in the sky began twisting as if they were afraid of the existence of light. Roland. The screaming dark clouds transformed into a gigantic demonic face that cast a shadow over the entire battlefield. However, this face seemed rather familiar to me. Shupness. This wasn't in my information. I could sense that Shupness was incredibly skilled in water magic. It would seem that this undead emperor was still hiding many things. I would have new topics to talk about in the future. As for Shupness's grudge against me, there were plenty of people who hated me. Unlike my information, Shupness didn't lose his sense of reason and charge over. Since the heavy rain and darkness on the battlefield had been dispelled, these several tens of thousands of undead will be no match for the human allied army. Shupness glared at me one last time as the dark clouds retracted and floated into the distance. Shupness had retreated. The high-level undead unhesitatingly started retreating as well, while the low-level cannon fodder was left behind on the battlefield. Not only that, the low-level cannon fodder had been forced to use up their last bit of potential. They would do anything to protect the intelligent undead as they retreated. This was why the undead calamity would always return. It would be meaningless to kill some cannon fodder without killing the high-level undead and undead lords. More than 90% of the undead army soldiers were nothing more than cannon fodder. Judging from the results of the battle, the humans had obtained a glorious victory. But judging from everyone's serious expressions, nobody believed that this was a victory. The undead had used less than 10% of the human allied army's strength, yet they had managed to cause so many casualties. Wounded people could be heard screaming for help everywhere on the battlefield. This was a good lesson for the arrogant humans. The undead calamity was definitely not to be trifled with. Even if the humans had the advantage in power level, this definitely wouldn't be a show or an outing. If the humans weren't careful, the entire human army would be wiped out. Meanwhile, I was also surrounded by archmages. I could already guess what they wanted to ask me, and so I took out a handwritten manuscript. This was a book that the fairies were going to publish next month. This book's title and content were destined to shake the entire world. It's time to step down from his divine altar on the nature of holy light. Perhaps this would be the last time I would ever try to steal from the Holy Church. Once the God of holy light stepped down from his divine altar, there would naturally be no need to continue. Chapter 757. How can a transmigrator become a saint of poetry if they don't create glass to make a fortune and recite poems? At the very least, they should copy some books and become a great writer. Back in the day, perhaps it was out of my desire to improve my life, or perhaps it was just a mockery of fate. I really did try to do something that a transmigrator should do. But the truth proved that some things were only fun to read about in novels. They weren't reliable at all in reality. That's right, this world's technology was still in the primitive Middle Ages. However, other people had magic and alchemy. Although engineering wasn't engineering at all, it was more than enough to deal with daily needs. When it came to creating glass, I did my best to create something similar, but I was told that other people's alchemists created something of a higher quality 1,000 years ago, which greatly damaged my body and mind. As for the other necessary equipment for transmigrators, such as coal, binoculars, salt drying methods, steel-making methods, cement, soap, I was a liberal arts student who had been working for many years. Chemistry and physics had long since been taught to my teachers. Just remembering the formulas was too difficult for me. Sometimes, I found it quite strange how those transmigrators remembered such knowledge. Even if you were an engineer, you probably wouldn't remember the most basic and useless knowledge. Even if I brushed my teeth every day, I wouldn't know the formula for toothpaste. How could you still remember the periodic table of elements and recipes for daily necessities when you transmigrated? As for reciting poems, that was even more unreliable. Let's not talk about the language barrier. Poetry did exist in this world, but it was completely different from yours. The only thing that could be used was that stories were universal. When you were poor, you could easily make up some stories and sell them. Fine, I admit that income was part of the reason, but the main reason was that I had a bad sense of humor. It was rare for me to transmigrate, so I wanted to give something to this world. Perhaps I should be thankful that I was a Chinese in my previous life. We were probably the race with the least religious beliefs in the world, but we did indeed have beliefs. We believed in our ancestors, believed in our own inherited culture, believed in morals and laws, believed in the long web of justice, believed that the heavens were watching, believed that good and evil would always be repaid. These subtly influenced beliefs weren't the same as worshiping a god, but they could still form the most complete values. That was why it was impossible for the reincarnated me to be a devout believer of the God of Holy Light. No, I should say that it was impossible for me to be like any other mortal who would entrust my body, mind, future, and soul to a tangible existence, even if that existence was a supreme God. Even back when I was called the Son of Holy Light, I only maintained the most basic level of respect for the God of Holy Light, as if he were a senior, a martyr whose name and achievements I had only heard of. Roland, date of birth unknown, a great existence who dedicated his entire life to the greatest cause, for the liberation of all humanity. I mean, for the safety and stability of the entire species. He started from the original concept of light, pursued it all the way, and finally brought the holy light that could expel chaos to mortals. But later, he brought the light to the heavens and left the mortal world. Everyone who desired the holy light actually wanted to worship him and worship him as their God. I approved of his great achievements and sacrifices, but I was unable to approve of his choices. Worship was the farthest away from the truth. Once something was placed on the altar of God, it would be impossible to change since it was covered in a holy coat. In that case, its practicality and functionality would greatly decrease. You guessed correctly. Holy light is also a type of energy, a type of element. I smiled as I revealed the true nature of holy light to the archmages. Perhaps some people had long since suspected this, but those who dare to say it out loud would either be treated as lunatics or sent to the gallows. Those who dare to try it out in secret, even if they were lucky enough to avoid the Holy Church and the world's attention, didn't obtain any convincing results in the end. But I was different. Holy light was indeed a type of energy, a type of element. However, it was an incredibly unique type of element. Holy light wasn't a natural creation, but rather a man-made creation. It would be impossible to use the old elemental theories to control holy light. Praying to the God of prayer equals establishing a connection to the God of holy light server. Paying spiritual energy and mana equals payment for using the internet and resources. The God of holy light bestowed power equals ding dong. Your delivery has arrived. Cough, cough. I meant that the holy light has been successfully summoned. No wonder the God of holy light was so powerful. It could be said that he had been monopolizing all this time. He was like a monopoly company that controlled all holy light users. This was also why he had been able to directly deprive Estrada of his holy light back in the plains of Bardi. His server had been blocked. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't have been a problem. However, the God of holy light had already lost his sense of self. It would be impossible for him to compromise, and it would be impossible for him to be flexible. Holy light would never change. Not only that, if something happened to him, although it sounded ridiculous, it was highly possible based on my calculations. If the server stopped responding, all users would lose their connection. In that case, all holy light users would lose their holy light. This was incredibly frightening. A monopoly would only affect progress, which was barely tolerable. However, a monopoly company would cause the entire industry to be destroyed along with it. That would be unacceptable. It's not impossible to summon holy light by using mana. Summoning holy light requires special techniques and secret techniques. I've written them all down in this book. It'll be sold next month. In order to avoid trouble from the Holy Church, I'll sell it tomorrow. If you're unable to summon holy light right away, please read the Southern Sect's teachings on pure holy light a few times. If you still can't understand, We have a backup Holy Light server here. You can still use the old-fashioned method to connect to it. Please contact the Hades Pillar of Light, Estrada. Yep, that's him, my teacher. He's currently an evil god in the Hades. I tossed out all this information to the mages and higher-ups of the various countries. 2 elderly priests fainted on the spot, and everyone stared at me as if I were a lunatic. You're insane. Even if this is the truth, why would you suddenly become enemies with the Holy Church at such a time? However, I chuckled. This was exactly the moment I wanted. After the Betrayers' Alliance was established, the Holy Church's reputation and substance suffered a major blow after abandoning San Antonio. It could be said that the Holy Church had fallen to the lowest point in its history. If I didn't stab the Holy Church in the back, how could I call it revenge? I meant the strongest ally. That's right, we had a Betrayers' Alliance. We agreed that we wouldn't cause trouble for the Holy Church regarding the San Antonio incident. I wasn't trying to cause trouble for them. I was simply telling them about my own research results. At most, I had some slight academic differences in my understanding of Holy Light. Yep, at most, I had some religious differences. The disputes that resulted in the most deaths in history were basically religious differences. If this was any other time, I would have been worried that the Holy Church would cause trouble for me. But right now, the Holy Church was in a hurry to leave San Antonio. Even if they saw what I did, they would pretend that they didn't see anything, although it was likely that they would take revenge afterwards. But wasn't I already used to this? This was just how our alliance was, stabbing each other in the back. While the Holy Church was at its weakest, this stab would definitely be vicious. However, it wouldn't shake the Holy Church's foundation for the time being. That was because the only people who would be able to accept a new definition of Holy Light and use Holy Light in a new way would definitely not be the commoners who provided the majority of the God of Holy Light's faith. But as long as this new Holy Light application was spread everywhere, it would be impossible for the Holy Church to extinguish the Holy Church's fire. Rather than saying that I was stabbing the Holy Church in the back, it would be more accurate to say that I was a despicable person who wanted to take advantage of their weakness. Although this was rather despicable, it would be incredibly beneficial for the entire world. I wasn't saying that it was a good thing that the Holy Church's authority as a religion would decrease. Rather, from a purely technical standpoint, praying and summoning holy light like a priest would be far too wasteful and extravagant in a holy war where combat strength was greatly lacking. This is a list of holy light magic spells that I've organized. Yep, you guessed correctly. These can be included in the major magic system. Mages can learn holy light spells through research. It was impossible for mages to directly control the original holy light of the Southern Sect. However, it was possible to control pure holy light. The most obvious proof was that none of the Southern Sect's priests or holy knights had any connection to the god of holy light. I then further organized their divine arts and research results to form this series of holy light spells. This seemingly thick booklet only had the spell theory and models for 3 spells. However, it covered the most basic applications and principles. The first spell was Light Arrow, which summoned holy light to attack the enemy. The second spell was Light Shield, which buffed the armor and shield with a thin layer of holy light. The last spell was a weak holy light spell. This didn't need any further explanation, as it was a simplified form of healing. Although it was quite simple, it provided research directions and practical applications for holy light. This seemed like a booklet, but it was actually a brand new magic system. Just thinking about holy light archmages was quite interesting. Interesting? I think it's scary. Archmages weren't idiots. After a short moment of astonishment, they understood what this meant. And whenever I looked at someone, that person would avoid me, shamelessly turn around, or pretend to be interested in the ants on the ground. These seemed like only a few minor spells, but if these archmages researched them, they would be able to create a brand new type of magic. Just by changing the existing spell models and using other types of spell structures, they would be able to easily create several dozen holy light spells, creating a brand new type of magic. Indeed, this would be a tremendous honor and an uncontrollable curiosity for the archmages. However, The prerequisite was that they would have to survive the Holy Church's hostility. Useless men. Star Revelations, Auntie Umla angrily took the booklet and carefully put it into her mage robe. I also heaved a sigh of relief. Star Revelation was one of the strongest mage organizations in the Cloud Tower. This was the best possible outcome. Right now, mages were still rational enough to suppress their greed for new knowledge. Once this magic system took shape, even if they didn't consider its advantages against the undead and demons, just the fact that it could be used as an emergency treatment would be enough for countless new mages to choose to study and research. At that time, alchemy and engineering, which were deeply related to modern magic, would also be involved. Holy light alchemy bombs, holy light Gundams, and so on. Just thinking about it made me feel excited. Once the trend of invention started, it would be impossible to stop. With the pressure from the Chaos Holy War, the seeds of invention would rapidly sprout. If the magical engineering technology brought about by Olivia's magic box was the first industrial revolution, then the transformation of holy light into magic, a small booklet that wasn't that thick, was highly likely to bring about the second industrial revolution and give holy light a brand new explanation. If the Holy Church hadn't suffered such a terrible defeat in San Antonio, I didn't even know when I would have been able to bring out this booklet. Finally, I'll be able to give Estrada an explanation. I sighed and rubbed my hands together. For some reason, I felt much more relaxed inside. In the end, no matter if it was the creation of pure holy light or the establishment of holy light systems, it was all thanks to the Hades' pillar of light that holy light had a new source, private server, that made all of this possible. Because holy light needs to be saved, that's why Estrada needs to. For some reason, I recalled how countless holy knights sighed helplessly in this land as well. They had been abandoned by the gods they had once believed in, yet they had chosen to find salvation from their hearts. Holy light should be used to protect. Chapter 758. Some things needed time to be gradually tested and spread. Holy light dispelled the dark clouds. The undead swarmed over like a tidal wave, but also left like a falling tide. The heavy rain and dark clouds left as well. Only now did the warriors discover that the sun was shining brightly above their heads. Although the intensity of the undead's attack was quite high, judging from how long this battle had been going on, it could only be considered an appetizer. The undead's ambush came quickly and retreated even faster. From the beginning to the end of the ambush, only about 20 minutes had passed. What was left was a scene of devastation. More than 4,500 people died, injured, or missing in battle. The Royal Dragon Knights lost 129 soldiers. The White Wolf Guard lost around 400 soldiers. The Dragon Knight Raiden was killed. The young Green Dragon Soteshi was injured, and the Dragon Knight died. The undead hadn't even started fighting yet, but they had already suffered such a heavy blow. Their morale was quite low. It was only natural that there would be losses on the battlefield. However, such a massive one-sided loss was unacceptable. The undead had only lost some low-level cannon fodder. Not only had the undead lost many elites, but they had also lost a Dragon Knight. By the way, that heroic Dragon Knight had forcefully flown up in the middle of a torrential downpour and killed a gargoyle. Then, he mysteriously fell from the sky. Now that I thought about it, it was highly likely that he had been ambushed by an undead emperor who had transformed into rain and clouds. It was impossible to hide the situation of the battle. Everyone here was a veteran soldier, so it was easy to see how the battle had turned out. Ordinary soldiers might be confused when faced with such a difficult situation, but the higher-level commanders would feel so uncomfortable that they wanted to vomit blood. Their elites had been knocked unconscious before they even left the battlefield. How could they accept such a huge blow to their morale? They had come to fight against the undead with high morale, but they had already suffered heavy losses before they even reached the front lines. Still, it was a good thing for me to go. It wasn't that I was overly happy about the human allied army's losses. It was just that I analyzed the situation from my own perspective. The current situation was even better than I had expected, and it was more acceptable. Actually, it was quite simple to think about it from another perspective. If I was Shupnus, I definitely wouldn't have used this trump card so easily. I would first use a small group of cannon fodder to attract the enemy's attention, using consecutive defeats to make the enemy lower their guard. Meanwhile, I would secretly gather an undead army and set up a trap for the enemy. I would then use this trump card to fight the final battle. If it wasn't just tens of thousands of low-level cannon fodder, but instead the entire elite army of several undead planes, then the losses would be incalculable. The first time a trump card was used, if it couldn't be exchanged for enough profit, it would be a waste. I didn't believe that Shupness, as the ruler of a world, wouldn't have such simple strategic thinking abilities. However, his ambush seemed rather petty. It's as if you've been watching the entire time, only to discover that there's an opportunity to take advantage of, so you're immediately gathering people to try and steal it. As an undead emperor, you're far too narrow-minded. Heloise's reflections were much the same as mine, and we looked at each other and came to the same conclusion. There's only one possibility that can explain everything. There's a problem among the undead. Shupness is unable to control the situation, and there's a problem with his military strength. Did the enemy have internal strife? Just after the great victory? This seemed inconceivable, but it was actually quite possible. Although the undead emperors were allies, the difference in power level and status was quite obvious. The two younger undead emperors were on the weaker side. The two older undead emperors, Sandro and the undead marshal, were firmly in control of the dimensional door. Nobody knew where the neutral undead emperor was now. The undead marshal was an incredibly rare warrior-type undead emperor. He had a special relationship with Aso, and his current targets were the ogres who had a blood feud with him. Sandro and I had been secretly communicating with each other. The Tark Republic's revival plan was secretly being carried out in the Northlands. If there was anyone who didn't want to see this situation the most, it would definitely be Sandro himself. After all, if the undead and the living's conflict became even more intense, even if Sandro's revival plan didn't immediately fail, it would still be greatly reduced. If the foundational structure of the Tark Republic couldn't be established during the Holy War, even if I could wait, Sandro might not be able to. Someone like Sandro wouldn't easily change his mind once he made up his mind. In that case, Sandro definitely wouldn't allow Shupness and to continue acting so recklessly. It was unlikely that Sandro would directly turn against Sandro. In that case, it would be easiest to tamper with his soldiers. A reason? Going together with the undead marshal to fight against the ogres and take revenge for the Tark Republic would be a good enough reason. Not only would the intelligent undead understand and support them, they would also receive the full support of the undead marshal who already wanted to fight against the ogres. As long as the dimensional door to the mortal plane was blocked and the undead army was transferred away, no matter how amazing and in Shupness were, it would be impossible for an undead emperor who didn't have a limitless calamity army to do anything. I need information. The Allied army had already set up temporary camps to bury the dead. The night attendants were currently burying the dead, and the priests and apothecaries were treating the injured. However, the generals were having endless strategy meetings. What could they possibly achieve from this discussion? Retreating would be impossible. It would be nothing more than blaming each other and shirking responsibility, then arguing over and over again before finally coming to a conclusion and continuing forward, just that they would be more careful. I couldn't be bothered to watch a bunch of muscular gorillas argue. I knew that they wouldn't be able to come to a conclusion, so I found an excuse to avoid going. After saying goodbye to Harlois, I directly left the campsite. As I walked out of the campsite, I took out my grimoire and casually recited a greeting. A cloud of black mist disappeared as quickly as it came. A ghost carriage stopped in front of me. As I walked, the mist of death surrounded me. By the time I got on the carriage, I found that I was no longer a living person, but a lich surrounded by mist of death. I was confident that I could fool any undead lord as long as I met an undead emperor herself, with just a little bit of illusory magic and the power of death. Let's go. It's been a long time since I visited the undead world. Asalivis was a gathering place for the undead. This had once been the front lines of the battlefield. The power of death there was always overwhelming. This was the first stop for countless undead from a mortal plane, and the teleportation portals to the 6 main undead planes would never stop working. Normally, this place would be a forbidden zone for the living. But today, many guests had come to visit. Shupness should have been quite happy that reinforcements had come to his doorstep. However, what made him incredibly angry was the burning wounds on his skin. These wounds constantly reminded him of the holy knight he had met not long ago. Although transforming into a dark cloud meant that he was immune to physical attacks, it also meant that his fragile soul was no longer protected by his physical body. Shupness' wounds caused by holy light caused him to experience extreme pain that he had forgotten for thousands of years. But right now, he needed to maintain a calm and confident expression. That was because these guests here were all greedy wolves that could turn on him at any moment. But right now, Shupness had no choice. Shupness, who he had thought to be a reliable ally, had betrayed him and left behind a terrible mess. Shupness would probably be the only one who could handle it. If he missed this opportunity, he could only return to the death plains with his tail between his legs. Venerated Devil Lord, we agree to your conditions. Now, please open the portal to the Chaos Abyss. Chapter 759. A friend's friend might not be a friend, but an enemy's enemy would easily become an ally. Today's encounter proved this fact once again. In the past, the devils have been inferior to the demons of the Endless Abyss in terms of overall combat strength. However, the main god-level existences Camilcius, Lord of Despair Heimer, and Lord of Desire Sarwinston were on the same side, and the devils became one of the strongest mega-factions in the lower planes. The devils relied on order within chaos to have such a unique social structure. They were also strangely militarized and corporatized. Although they had many flaws, they were able to use 30% of their combat strength due to their excellent organization and strategic abilities. They also had many tricks up their sleeves. In many aspects, at least in the eyes of the world, the devils were on equal footing with the demons. Actually, the biggest headache for the devils back then was that death god Ale faintly supported the devils. This made it so that no main god would be willing to completely antagonize the devils. However, some things had completely changed. The 9 devil lords were all famous sources of evil in all the planes. But now, 2 of the main god-level existences had actually joined the Hades faction, taking another devil lord with them. Plus, the Queen of Temptations had betrayed them both. The devils now only had 1 main god-level devil lord, Sarwinston, and 4 lower-level devil lords left. 1 year ago, the Lord of Curses, Lasnina, had been completely sealed away by Roland. She had lost yet another devil lord. Then, Cavendish had killed off another devil lord. Things couldn't get any worse. The previous 9 devil lords had been the peak faction of 3 main gods. Now, there were only 3 devil lords left. It just so happened that the devils lacked one. Cough, cough, I meant that there wasn't even enough for them to defend their own shrinking territory. If it wasn't for the fact that the Holy War coincided with the mortal plane and that everyone's attention was focused on it, it was likely that the devils would have already been destroyed by the demons and evil gods. In the lower planes, being weak was a sin. If the weak occupied the richest territory and plane, who else would be destroyed? In many people's eyes, the devils' decline was inevitable after losing more than half of their core and higher-ups. Perhaps the devils' final outcome would be to give up some additional territory and occupy a lower plane, no different from other evil gods and demon lords. How could Sarwinston, the only remaining devil lord, accept such an ending? Very good. Considering our similar positions, I believe we can get along very well. In terms of appearance, Sarwinston didn't look like a demon. Instead, he looked like a dragon. Now that he was in the mortal plane, although he had already shrunk in size, he was still more than 30 meters tall, which was impossible to hide. From afar, he looked like a gigantic 2-headed dragon shrouded in shadows. But in reality, Sarwinston had 3 heads. 2 dragon heads. The black one breathed in and out light green flames, while the white one breathed in and out black frost. The one who truly made the decision and thought was the black human figure between the two dragon heads. It was a shadow formed by a mass of shadows. It did not have a face, and its body could not be seen clearly. However, there was a crown formed by shadows on its forehead, and all the sounds came from it. With such an appearance, people would naturally say that he used to be a dragon, but perhaps even the most ancient primordial dragon hadn't lived as long as this primordial devil, so it was impossible to find out his origins. Currently, Sarwinston's two dragon heads were laughing uproariously. Just his frighteningly loud voice was enough to cause the pitiful skeleton servants to collapse. Shupness seemed quite tiny in front of Sarwinston, but nobody would ignore him. Around them, Liches and Liches were currently making minor adjustments to the teleportation portals to the undead planes. Teleportation portals that were restricted from the undead planes were meaningless to begin with. Now, they were being adjusted to be more suitable for the lower planes. In the soul-summoning towers around them, numerous living beings were being sacrificed as they screamed in pain. Their souls would be used to activate the teleportation portals. Unlike Roland's expectations, Shupness didn't take, and with him, to have a disagreement with the other undead emperors. Rather, Shupness had a huge argument with Sandro, who came to talk to him. The other undead emperors simply went their separate ways. That's right, this included and who had been with Shupness for a long time. Apart from Roland and Harlois, and was probably the undead emperor with the least experience in the entire world. All she desired was to harvest enough souls and flesh to create her own undead country in order to satisfy her research and daily needs. Originally, she was quite close to Shupness, who had been boasting about fighting his way all the way to San Antonio. However, in the previous major victory, and had harvested 500,000 souls by herself. All right then, there was no need to explain what happened afterwards. In order to avoid having to spit out everything he had just eaten, Shupness shamelessly took the money and ran away. With Sandro's assistance, a large number of corpses and souls were sent to Anne's Plane of Darkness, and then unhesitatingly returned to her home in satisfaction. She had been intending to make a quick profit and then run away. Now, not only had she achieved her goal, she could even avoid the humans' revenge attacks. What was there to hesitate about? Since they had a falling out, Sandro and the undead led the army west into the sea to directly cause trouble for the ogres. It was impossible for Shupness to stop them since he was alone. Only the pitiful Shupness was left. Since he had a falling out with the other undead emperors, the desecration plane was cut off from Asalivis. Shupness wouldn't be able to send any more troops over even if he wanted to. Not to mention that a certain someone had shamelessly run away with his spoils of war. Shupness really didn't have any troops he could use. You're all so short-sighted, foolish, and cowardly. Are you satisfied just like that? I'm ashamed to be associated with you. After successfully chasing away the other undead emperors, Shupness was forced to personally act due to his lack of troops. However, he still wasn't able to achieve a sufficient victory, so he was forced to use his backup plan. His choices were actually quite limited. Only the residents of the lower planes would be able to form a long-term alliance with the undead. Shupness was quite familiar with the demons' personalities. It would be easier to invite a god than to send a god over. No matter how the situation developed, the final result would likely be scorched earth and ruins. This would conflict with his ambitious goal of creating a country of the undead. In the end, Shupness could only contact the devils, who were also in a difficult situation. At the very least, they could communicate and form a contract with each other. Not only did he receive a response, the devil main god even personally came to visit him. Shupness was rather unwilling to accept this as he watched the devils walk out of the dimensional door. He knew that once the devils here surpassed the undead in both numbers and combat strength, he would naturally lose his authority. However, the humans' allied armies were right in front of him, and he was unable to back down. A tremendous number of captives were slaughtered and turned into sacrifices for the dimensional door. The smell of blood was nauseating, but Sarwinston was quite satisfied. He had waited far too long for this opportunity. At this moment, Asalivis was greeted by an old-fashioned ghost horse. As for me, I felt like things were becoming more and more difficult to deal with as I watched the devils flying in the sky. Chapter 760. Coming here, personally, was quite valuable. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know how things would have developed to such a state. Black mist swirled around me. Faint dark flames floated behind me. The faint white light caused the low-level undead to instinctively retreat in fear. Only you could think of wrapping holy light in a lantern made out of the power of death. But aren't you afraid of attracting the attention of an undead emperor by using holy light in the undead's camp? Although the silly cat didn't have a high opinion of my creativity, it seemed that things had been quite smooth for me so far. The low-level undead would instinctively avoid me, and the high-level intelligent undead would rarely meddle in other people's business. As for the guards, should I say that I had already obtained a fake permit from Asalivis? But considering that Sandro was the one in charge, I should say that this was a real permit. But the deeper I went into the camp, the more I felt that the situation was bad. The sky-reaching black pillar of light was still present, but the negative power of death was much fainter than before. In fact, the familiar smell of sulfur reminded me of the cute and hospitable native residents of the lower plains. What else are you thinking about? The devils are right in front of you. Silly cat, will you feel uncomfortable if you don't ruin my plans? How's the situation at the camp? Are they still communicating? I discovered that I was becoming more and more dependent on Harlow's stability. I had Harlow's clones help me keep an eye on the situation and gather information while also listening to the live broadcast of the camp. It was truly a cat with many uses. It was convenient and economical. Although I was joking, I was actually in a terrible mood. If someone was treated as a jinx, it could be said that they would cause explosions wherever they went, even if it wasn't their fault. But looking at my luck, it was no longer just causing explosions wherever I went. It was basically that wherever I went, an earthquake and a volcano would erupt simultaneously. Why is it another chaos main god? Can you guys be nice and not come looking for me? Main god-level existences would have to intentionally hide their auras. Otherwise, they would be like dried salted fish that would stink for 5 kilometers in the wind. What I meant was that their existences were far too strong. Just their aura alone was enough to make people feel uncomfortable. Sarwinston didn't intentionally hide his presence. Even if he didn't see his gigantic dragon body that was more than 100 meters long, his order domain with negative energy was his signature move. The number of devils was constantly increasing. As time passed, the devil army would become stronger with every passing moment. With the summons of the devil main god, the devils would be able to bring out limitless power due to their pyramidal societal structure. I didn't intend to get any closer. Apart from the fact that I didn't intend to test the devil main god senses, it was also because there was no longer any need to continue investigating this place. The dimensional door here was the highest level permanent dimensional door. Once it was activated, it would be impossible to stop unless the dimensional door was completely destroyed. And challenging a devil lord with an entire army by myself, I still wanted to live for a few more years. With every passing moment, the devil army would become slightly stronger. Perhaps this wasn't as destructive and explosive as the demon wave, but when the devils form an army, it would become a super troublesome existence on the same level as the Chaos Abyss Blood Wars. I used a memory crystal to record the scene in front of me. The allied army couldn't stop. I had intended to return directly, but I unexpectedly met a familiar person. That mummy lord? Isn't he Sandro's servant? While Roland was having a hard time dealing with the devils that had suddenly appeared, Anina, who had just returned to her hometown in the Death Plane of Darkness, was also in trouble. Originally, she had brought a tremendous number of souls back to her home. She had been quite careful in order to prevent other undead lords from robbing her. But when she finally returned to her home, she met with bandits. The Death Plane of Darkness was a rarely seen plane without any light. It was a world without any natural light. Ordinary people would find it difficult to imagine how cold and empty it would be. Even intelligent undead wouldn't be able to endure the eternal darkness, and it brought souls back to this plane in order to make it lively again. But now a maniacal evil guest had arrived uninvited. He destroyed every mountain and city he came across, as if he was searching for something in this world. Before, in return, several hundred undead lords had already fallen before him. This was quite abnormal. That was because the death plane had nothing apart from undead and negative energy. It would be meaningless for non-undead life forms. And, who had just returned to the death plane, discovered that the death plane's target was actually her. He had been waiting for her in her home territory all this time. Roland? No, the Abyss Prince Cavendish. This face was a little familiar to Anina, and in the next moment, she had a sudden realization. You're in? Huh, you're such a beauty. What a pity. You're a chaos girl. Hand over your soul and accept your fate. The golden-haired prince, who wore blood-red armor and wielded a magic sword, smiled confidently as he gave his final warning to Anina. It was as if the undead emperors who had dominated the undead plains were nothing more than weaklings that he could kill at will. Kill him, and screamed out of instinctive fear. Countless undead started crawling out from every corner of the death plane. The death plane was a paradise for the undead, the home of the undead emperors. The entire plane trembled under the summons of the top-level undead emperors. What sort of undead army was this? The Blood Tribe nobles were nothing more than vanguards. The 100-meter-tall Stitch monsters were nothing more than meat shields. And the Bone Dragons were nothing more than convenient transportation. Cavendish shook his head as he faced the endless undead army with a condescending smile. Why is it that everyone struggles, even if it's meaningless? 3 hours later, the entire death plane became nothing more than history. Cavendish left a single message with and amidst the ruins of countless corpses. 19 more. Chapter 761. Undead lords were more or less eccentric. The more powerful and ancient they were, the more eccentric they would be. They would always need some hobby to pass their time. As time passed, their past memories would shatter into pieces, and new memories would randomly accumulate. Their personalities would become slightly abnormal, far too normal. Is this another way of saying that being too lonely will make you a pervert? How convincing, old pervert Roland. Silly cat, shut up. How about we calculate the age difference between us and see who's more likely to be an old pervert? Fine, let go of that innocent eggplant. Undead emperors were even more so. Undead emperors were the undead among the undead. Only the most paranoid of paranoid undead emperors would be able to reach their current level. I had yet to meet an undead emperor who was mentally healthy. Undead emperors were either schizophrenic, paranoid, or severely paranoid. At any rate, they were a bunch of weirdos who thought and acted normally. While I talked with Sandro, I discovered to my astonishment that he was actually quite normal. Yes, I was astonished because he was relatively normal. He was logical, and reasonable. He was capable of communicating and could even joke around. He was completely able to communicate normally, which made me cry tears of gratitude. What do you mean? You're making it sound like the other undead emperors are all lunatics who want to destroy the world at the slightest disagreement. Cough, cough, look over there. Harlois was rather displeased that I was talking about everything. However, I only indicated for her to look at the devil army that was continuously pouring out of the chaos abyss, and her voice became quieter and quieter. Sharpness had once again broken my bottom line. Those chaos abyss teleportation portals were currently transforming into permanent dimensional doors, while the death planes were closing. As long as this continued, this place would become the devil's new territory. Is Sharpness a lay phone who loves to help others? He doesn't know that at this point, even if he manages to conquer this land, it won't be the undead's territory anymore. Or perhaps he wants to conquer something that can't be transmitted and that he doesn't need it anymore. Cough. Since he can't obtain it, he might as well destroy it all. Although I was joking, I was actually in a rather bad mood. A powerful devil's aura suddenly rose up in the distance. Yet another devil lord had entered the mortal plane. In the past, the Order gods who were supposed to be the scapegoats, the demons slaying Order gods, would likely not appear at all. From a certain standpoint, our alliance also meant that we had separated from the Holy Light faction. While we obtained independence, we would no longer be able to enjoy the same benefits as before. This devil wave could only be stopped by the alliance of humans and the gods of Hades. A main god leading 2 devil lords, as well as an endless devil army. Just the thought of it gave everyone a headache. But from another perspective, this was also an opportunity to display his strength and confidence. As long as they were victorious, it would prove that the Hades faction was completely capable of protecting their own subordinates, giving them a chance to contend against the Order faction. As long as they could survive this, the previously unknown Hades faction would immediately gain a huge boost in reputation. Heaven and hell were very far apart. Opportunity and danger existed at the same time. It all depended on how one grasped it. If you get distracted again, that guy will leave. Cough. Aren't you helping me keep an eye on him? I'm just trusting you. At this moment, we are tailing someone, and the one we are tailing is the Mummy Lord, who is wearing a suit despite being tied up with bandages all over his body. He wore a black suit, a swallowtail coat, a round hat, a black cane, and a monocle. Even though he was a mummy who couldn't move around easily, he was dressed like a noble's butler from 300 years ago. He left a deep impression on me. This mummy was Sandro's trusted aide, and he was incredibly close to Sandro. Back then, Sandro even used this mummy as his mouthpiece due to his inability to speak. Perhaps if I followed this mummy, I would be able to find Sandro himself. The old gentleman mummy walked quite slowly. Undead like him wouldn't be able to catch up to him quickly. All I needed to do was follow him from afar. When he turned into a soul-summoning tower, I decided to appear in front of him. After all, we were allies, the type that didn't use quotation marks. Rather than continue tailing him, it would be better to directly talk to him. Phil? If I recalled correctly, that should be his name. However, my appearance surprised him for a moment before he was obviously delighted. Your Majesty Roland, please come over here. Be careful of spies. His simple words revealed far too much information. As Sandro's trusted aide, he had to be careful here. Careful of who? Why would he be careful? 10 minutes later, we completed our deal under the night sky. I meant, we completed the exchange of information regarding the spies. Just as I expected, Sandro had a falling out with Shupness right after the first battle. Sandro had even directly left with his subordinates. Sandro had kept Phil here in order to provide information to the human allied armies. Even if I didn't meet him, Phil would have voluntarily visited me and provided information to the human allied armies. How sly. Indeed, sly old fox. Harlois and I had the same evaluation of Sandro. However, Phil was in a rather awkward situation. He was basically saying bad things about his boss to his face, and it just so happened that neither Sandro nor Shupness were easy targets to offend. Sandro was indeed sly. Even if an existence like him continued to be a bystander in the undead army, nobody would be able to order him to risk his life on the battlefield. And Sandro had intentionally. The only possibility was that he had a falling out with Shupness on purpose. That was to give Shupness an excuse to surrender to the humans. He was also saying, I'm not on Shupness's side, so don't blame Barty's blood feud on me. In that case, with our recommendation, it would be easier for Shupness to be accepted by all human society. The only victim here was probably Shupness himself. Even though he had clearly won, he discovered that he had been betrayed by everyone in a single night. He had worked so hard to win the battle, but not only did his allies betray him, they even cut off his army supply and food supplies, and even threw him into the hands of his enemies. This was no ordinary overboard. No wonder Shupness was so angry that he directly gathered reinforcements from the Chaos Abyss to destroy the world. He's selling out his allies, isn't he? That's rather despicable. He's selling out his allies. Isn't that super despicable? Phil felt even more awkward. Couldn't these two higher-ups say something nicer? Although everyone knew that this was the truth, they couldn't possibly make him say it in front of his subordinates. This meant that he had to decide whether or not to tell them the truth. If he told them the truth, it would seem petty, but if he didn't, it would seem like he was being disloyal to his leader. Of course, I didn't care about what Phil thought. Being able to meet him saved me a lot of effort. And then, I intended to run away, fight the undead and devil's allied army by myself. I didn't want to die young and have my tombstone marked with stupidity and overconfidence as the cause of my death. I felt that the silly cat and the others would really do something like that. I had no choice but to run away. If it had been any other situation, I might have tried, but with the Devil Lord of Tyranny here, I didn't want to try fighting a main god by myself. Although others believed that I was able to chase away Sophocles the Deceiver and instantly kill the Seraphim because of my personal power level, I knew that I was still far from being a main god. The only reason I was able to do all this was because of my special abilities. I had prepared a powerful trump card specifically designed to deal with demons, angels, and devils. By the way, devils are also on the list of chaos creatures. They're also countered by my trump card. Should I try a bold, suicidal idea popped up in my mind? Perhaps with my combination of abilities, I would be able to do something. What if I failed? Personally, I was quite confident in my ability to escape. At most, I would just run for my life again. If I didn't run, I would offend the devils and be hunted down by the devils. What a joke. Hadn't I offended the devils enough already? I was probably the mortal that the god of tyranny wanted to kill the most. As long as he won and took over this area? No. As long as he gained a stable foothold in the mortal plane, he would definitely come looking for me for revenge no matter what. Since I can accept both success and failure, I'm already as bad as I can be. Why not try it? After making up my mind, I flashed Phil a friendly smile that I thought was friendly and ignored his rude action of suddenly taking a large step backwards. At a time like this, I would have to rely on the local tyrant. But first, the scenery around me instantly changed as I returned to the familiar land of Black Hades. Let's first ask Phil's old teammate. Little TIAs, what powerful abilities does your housekeeper? No, Tyranny have. Does he have any weaknesses? Where are his weaknesses? Others would always have a grandpa by their side, but I would always have my opponent's former teammate by my side. At any rate, teammates were meant to be sold. Let me give that little devil an unexpected surprise and welcome ceremony. Chapter 762. Harlois. What do you think is the most important part of a successful assassination? Since I was far too bored during the long wait, I went to chat with Harlois. Assassination? I've never been an assassin before, but I've received training to defend against assassins. The main thing is to be careful of strangers and not go to dangerous, remote places with no exits. If you ask me, the most important part of an assassination is to appear at a critical location at a critical moment when the enemy isn't on guard. That's right. The most important thing for an assassin is patience. Patience. This place wasn't Shupness's palace, but rather a personal Hades world that I was familiar with. Preparing for an assassination here wouldn't attract any attention. I wasn't a professional assassin. No, I couldn't even be considered a qualified assassin. Considering my lousy stealth and disguise abilities, I might be able to trick ordinary undead, but it would be impossible for me to trick an undead emperor who had the ability to see through souls or a devil lord who was a professional swindler. That was why I chose a rather foolish method. Keep hiding here. I refuse to believe that he won't come out. Rather than entering the center of the devil's town and approaching the target under layers of inspection, I might as well wait for him to come out himself. My bitter battle against Sophocles the Deceiver had probably exposed much of my abilities. However, my personal Hades world had always been top secret. I had entered my personal Hades world at the main entrance of Shupness's palace. Naturally, I would be at the same location when I came out. Someone should have guessed it already. That's right. I intended to use my personal Hades world's abilities to wait until the Lord of Tyranny came out, and then suddenly appear and viciously attack him. The only problem was patience. Patience. The hell with patience. It's already been 1.5 days. That bastard is still hiding there and refusing to come out. Patience my ass. Finally, my patience was about to collapse. No wonder I couldn't take it anymore. I had already waited here for 37 hours, and in order to successfully assassinate Sarwinston, I had to maintain this position for almost 8 hours. Let's take a break. Another batch of living captives has been sent over as food. It seems that Sarwinston still doesn't intend to come out today. I put down my magic sword while sweating profusely. The endless light faded, and everything returned to normal. Legend has it that in the distant east, there is a group of mysterious people. In order to assassinate or gather information, they can squat under the toilet pit for several days, waiting for their target to enter the toilet. What kind of dedication is that? Don't talk nonsense. I've been to the East. How could there be such a disgusting person? Isn't it like watching someone above your head? Disgusting, it's really disgusting. You don't say. Although it's just hearsay, I'm not spouting nonsense. There really are cases like this. That's why they call it the benevolent, great mistake. No, endure, great mistake. Yep, it should be true this time. I'm really good at enduring. His memory seemed to be a little fuzzy. In short, he was a person who could endure very well. That was probably what he meant. Wrong word. After so long, it was inevitable. Therefore, this time, we must carry forward the spirit of enduring and wait until the end. If the enemy doesn't come, we won't leave. It's just that there's someone above me. Then I'd better leave. It's really not human to endure. Don't say any more. That's too disgusting. You definitely remembered wrongly. How could such a job class exist? I could only helplessly shake my head. In this day and age, nobody would believe the truth. Perhaps I had remembered some details incorrectly, but the overall situation was probably correct. This really seemed to be historical fact. After I gave the order to temporarily rest, the distant pillar of light also stopped sending holy light to me. Everything returned to normal. I nodded in satisfaction as I glanced at the dawn holy sword in my hand that was losing its glow. Due to the excellent materials used, this holy sword's abilities far surpassed my expectations in all aspects. Is that sword of yours really effective? Of course, as long as I manage to land a hit. The charging time will also end. Although I sounded quite confident, I was still rather uncertain. At this moment, I was truly regretting having fought against Sophocles the Deceiver back then. If it wasn't for the fact that I had shown off my ability to threaten a chaos main god, causing Sophocles to be on guard against me, I would have many more tricks up my sleeves. I wouldn't have to foolishly wait for Sophocles to come out. My Dawn Holy Sword had two main attack modes. The second mode was the Dawn Sun mode that I had previously demonstrated on the battlefield. In that mode, it would release light that would greatly weaken and purify the enemy. The second mode was the light concentration mode. It would furiously gather holy light and transform it into an indestructible blade of light. As for the upper limit of its attack power, that would depend on my and this sword's limits. I didn't know that. Back then, Sophocles took a blow from me, and he didn't even charge up to half of his maximum power. Although he only received a superficial wound, he did indeed injure a chaos main god. This time, Dawn's maximum charging time is 8 hours, so its attack power should be several times greater than before. This was both a prediction and a way to give myself some confidence. No matter how excellent a weapon was in theory, it would always be uneasy if it hadn't been tested in actual combat. This was because the materials used to create this holy sword were far too excellent. The ancient sun god's god equipment gem, the god of holy light's origin spear, and the holy knight's inherited battle hammer. These three top-level god equipment combined into one. Although it wouldn't reach 3 times the power of god equipment, it would definitely be no worse than a god equipment's material. I still hadn't reached its limit yet. In fact, the 8-hour limit was my personal limit. At that point, I would have reached the limit of how much holy light I could control. I would only be able to last for 10 minutes at most. If I didn't swing my sword or stop using holy light, I would likely be unable to handle it. Stop complaining. At the very least, you don't have to charge up holy light yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't even have enough even if you were drained dry. Harloise was indeed right. If it weren't for this bug-like world of mine, not only would it allow me to continuously charge up holy light through my Tower of Hades, it would also allow me to peacefully charge up holy light for several hours just to swing my sword. Indeed, on the battlefield, not to mention 8 hours, I wouldn't even give you 3 minutes. Pouring holy light into my Dawn sword wasn't simply a matter of calculating the time. The closer I got to my limit, the more holy light and time I would need. After only half an hour of pouring holy light into my sword, this pitch-black world of Hades had transformed into a paradise of dawn. And after 3 hours, not only would Harloise instinctively retreat, Even I would feel numb just looking at my sword of light. Since I had limitless energy, the only thing I needed to charge up was time. From a certain standpoint, this was also a type of forbidden spell. It required the source of holy light to continuously supply me with energy, just like a mage tower. Then I would have to charge up for several hours and transform all the energy into a fatal attack. Oh dear, if we go too far and end up exploding, Fine, put down that innocent eggplant. I won't spout nonsense again. You've been playing around lately. Could it be? I wisely shut my mouth as I saw the silly cat eagerly waving the eggplant around. All right, rest is over. Let's try again. I was feeling more and more the advantage of reaching semi-god. At the very least, as long as I had some rest, drank some water, and ate some bread, I would be able to swiftly recover my stamina. This seemed rather familiar. Didn't I recall that all the characters in video games also drank water and ate bread to recover their HP? What sort of strange constitution and setting was this? Cough, focus. I gripped my dawn sword and began summoning holy light again. The distant tower of holy light also started glowing brilliantly. Endless holy light shone on me and began providing energy for me and my dawn sword. This type of trick could only be used once. I definitely wouldn't be able to pull it off again. So, this time, I truly intended to take advantage of this opportunity and obtain actual combat results. Keep squatting, and keep enduring. I refuse to believe that he won't come out to go to the toilet. No, wait. I refuse to believe that he won't come out. For Shupness, perhaps coming to the mortal plane had been a mistake in the first place. He felt like he was nothing more than a large coffee table with tragedies laid out on top of it. He had come to the mortal plane with great ambitions, believing that he could finally create a world for the undead. But before he could even accomplish anything, he suffered multiple setbacks. His teammates were all slacking off, while Shupness could only do his best by himself. He worked so hard to win this battle, but when he turned around, he discovered that all of his allies had run away. His most trusted ally even took away most of the spoils of war. Shupness had worked so hard, but not only did he end up with nothing, he even became the enemy of the humans. Now, he could only wait to be defeated. From Shupness's perspective, this was truly a case of blood and tears at every step he took. Even though we're all allies, and even though we agreed to conquer the undead's country together, killing humans is a type of joy, and sharing joy with undead allies is also a type of joy. Why are you all so skilled at betraying us? Just how many times have you all betrayed us? This was all Roland's own imagination. It had nothing to do with Shupness himself. As for Baishuejue, he should be dragged out and beaten to death first. At this point, if Shupness didn't hold any grudges, he would probably be a saint. Was undead Emperor Shupness a saint? Obviously not. Shupness was famed for his violent temper, and not only was he filled with resentment, he also couldn't find a place to vent his anger. He was about to explode from holding it in. However, as a tyrant, Sarnston wouldn't care about what Shupness thought. Shupness demanded that the devils fulfill their contract and immediately attack the human allied armies. However, Shupness was told that the devils had forgotten to specify a date on their contract, so they would definitely attack the humans. However, the date of the attack would depend on the devil's mood. Only those who were in a stronger position would have the right to speak. Shupness didn't hesitate at all. He simply turned around and left with a depressed expression. It was obvious that his anger had reached its limit. From a certain standpoint, Shupness was truly an ancient artifact from the previous century. Even devils could easily trick him. If Shupness met Roland, of course, there was a special reason for this. Shupness had probably never met an existence that dared to trick him before. Devil lords didn't need to give any face to undead emperors, and Shupness could trick Shupness however he wanted. Right now, Sarnston had no intention of fulfilling his contract at all. He was quite patient and didn't do anything at all. Everyone knew that as long as Shupness opened the dimensional door to the lower planes, Sarnston's armies would become stronger with each passing day. Meanwhile, the undead would naturally become weaker and weaker, and they would naturally lose their dominance. Sarwinston actually felt that it was a pity that Shupness was so easily dealt with. Sarwinston didn't even need to use his contract traps and runes to supplement his contract. However, it could be seen that Shupness's patience had reached its limit. In that case, Sarwinston would go out with Shupness to inspect his army tomorrow. It was time to let those undead bones witness the greatness of a devil lord. Sarwinston thought this and finally came to a decision. The next morning, when Sarwinston and Shupness finished their discussion and approached the palace's main entrance, a mortal suddenly appeared before them. "Why does this person look so familiar?" Sarwinston's expression instantly changed. Of course, this person's face was familiar. Both of his brothers had this face, but no matter who this person was, they were both mortal enemies of the devils. "Hi, nice to meet you. Eat my sword." Sarwinston then watched as the golden-haired holy knight warmly greeted him. And then, "Sword? What sword?" Only now did Sarwinston notice that the holy knight was holding a sword. However, there wasn't any holy light on the sword's hilt. There was only faint darkness. There was no blade on the sword's hilt. There was only a dark night made of stardust. Light had reached an extreme level, transforming into nothingness that resembled a black hole. Sarwinston didn't have the time to exclaim about his own discovery. He didn't notice that Shupness had already hidden behind him the moment he saw Shupness. In a way, Shupness shouldn't be too angry at the other undead emperors. Betraying one's allies was a tradition of the undead emperors. Holy light, this enemy is worth fighting. The next instant, a torrent of light drowned out everything. Chapter 763. Although I had previously mentioned the concept of light and darkness as one, I hadn't come to this conclusion through theoretical deductions or data research. This is similar to a type of philosophy, no metaphysics. For example, summoning Valkyrie requires a holy artifact, or washing one's hands, face, bathing, changing clothes, and applying powder on one's face. Since there are far too many unknowns, this can only be considered a half guess and half deduction. In terms of foundational principles, the Eastern concepts of yin and yang could be counted as well. Just like how the Eastern and Western concepts of elemental theory both originated from earth, fire, water, and wind. The Eastern concepts had yin and yang, while the Western concept had light and darkness. Perhaps they seemed quite different, but they were essentially two conflicting powers. Everything was created through conflict and harmony. Although this sounded like a ridiculous foundational principle, and the most reliable foundational theory was that only the goddesses of order and chaos could create the world together. However, through my experiments, I proved that when light and darkness, order and chaos combined, it was indeed possible to create life. No matter how ridiculous a foundational theory or theory is, as long as there's experimental evidence, it can be treated as fact. And so, I abandoned all foundational principles and theories and started purely from the practical aspects of reality. I verified that light and darkness were both physical manifestations of order and chaos. They were foundationally interchangeable. If the interchangeability is successful, no matter if it's light or darkness, they'll both be incredibly high-level energy. They should be the highest level elemental power. However, I had never been able to complete this interchangeability in my normal state. In fact, I even suspected that my foundational theory was wrong. But since there were far too many unknowns, I didn't even know where to start. Now, it would seem that my ridiculous foundational theory wasn't wrong. It's just that the amount of holy light required to complete such a qualitative change is far too ridiculous. How much holy light had the Hades pillar of light accumulated? As a complete world with its own independent cycle, Hades' pillar of light should have limitless power. What was the upper limit of Dawn's holy light sword? The most ancient sun god's god equipment was a part of its interchangeability. The spear of holy light was its core. The sturdiest battle hammer was its blade. At the very least, I was unable to find any other material that could surpass Dawn's holy light sword. What is the limit of my ability to control the holy light? The ancient war angel bloodline, the highest ranked bloodline in the Order faction, had already been fully activated. With the war angel's natural talent and physical body, my affinity with the power of order had already surpassed that of the so-called order gods. My affinity with the power of order was only slightly lower than that of the goddess of order. Not only that, my double diamond bloodline physical body gave me sufficient physical strength so that I wouldn't explode from the power of order. Since Dawn was a part of my body, it would naturally be able to take on some of the pressure for me. When all the conditions were combined, the upper limit of the light that Dawn could gather became extremely frightening. Holy light. While I was praising the holy light, I was still astonished by the scene before me. After charging for half an hour, the entire bug-like world was lit up and all the darkness had nowhere to hide. After 4 hours, the lightsaber had turned into a solid blade. It was extremely stable, just like a solid blade. 6 hours later, the light began to turn dark. At first, there were only a few black shadows, but as time passed, more and more black shadows wrapped around the lightsaber. However, incomprehensible to me, this newly formed darkness didn't clash with the light at all. Instead, it mixed together harmoniously. 7 hours later, Dawn's entire blade was now half dark and half light. It seemed to be a mixture of colors, but the faintly present energy far surpassed any so-called forbidden spell. It made me wonder just what would happen if a single point of light exploded. 8 hours later, I reached my limit as well. My entire blade was completely transparent. It wasn't bright light, nor was it dim darkness. Instead, it was completely silent, just like the most primordial chaos. Holy light, this enemy is worth fighting. From a certain standpoint, Sarwinston was fortunate that he didn't meet me when Dawn was at its limit. But from a certain standpoint, he was also unfortunate, because he was only half an hour away from his limit of 8 hours. Was he supposed to shout a slogan at a time like this? It wasn't like I was a saber with a face everywhere. Fine, since this was the norm. Broken shoe slash, evil slash. A holy knight's most basic combat technique was to gather holy light on the blade and then forcefully swing it. But as one's cultivation improved, and as the quality and quantity of holy light on the blade improved, that simplicity and purity transformed into an evil nightmare. I had practiced this sword technique countless times. Charging and swinging my sword was as simple and hot as breathing. There was no reason for me to miss at such a close distance. And when I swung my sword, the next instant, my blade directly shattered. Chaos transformed into darkness and light. Light occupied the entire world. The undead were unable to block out the sunlight. Night transformed into day as the entire world was illuminated. It's day. Even the undead who were several dozen kilometers away could sense the arrival of day. At such a close distance, everyone felt as if they were blind. They were unable to see anything at all. Even an undead emperor's soul, I would be completely useless here. Meanwhile, outside of Asalivis, I could see a dragon of light passing through the entire city. This dragon of light exploded from the center of the city and swept through the skeleton barracks, ghost barracks, and bone dragon barracks. After covering half of the city, this dragon of light directly rushed out of the city and continued sweeping through everything until it destroyed the mountains behind Asalivis. Did I succeed? I panted heavily. My stamina and mana were all used up. Even a user of this attack was blind. Perhaps this was one of the side effects of this attack. The strange part was that even though this attack had nothing to do with hearing, I had also lost sensation in my ears. No, not only that, I had also lost connection with my physical body. It was as if I didn't exist at all. This feeling could only mean that I had lost all 5 senses. No, that wasn't all. I had also lost my connection with my magical pet. If it wasn't that one of us had died, then even my so-called sixth sense, the heart's eye, had been cut off. However, I knew that no matter what the result was, I had already lost all combat strength. Every second would be precious time for me to escape. But directly running away like this would be far too lame. Since the enemy had also lost his vision, I might as well follow my original plan. A dimensional crack opened up and swallowed me again. Where did I come from? Where did I come from? They would never have expected that the assassin hadn't left at all. I lay on the ground of Hades for a full 10 minutes. First, my hearing, then my sense of pain, gradually began to recover. By the time I regained my vision, more than half an hour had passed. It would seem that I would first need to invent a pair of sunglasses to use this attack in the future. What's the result? Only now was I able to start asking questions. The silly cat should have told me earlier, but she was actually able to disrupt even our soul connection. This was truly an abnormal technique. Harloise didn't say anything. She gave me a picture. The powerful Sarwinston was now missing half of his body. His main head in the middle and his fire head on the right were both gone. Only his ice head and the area below his neck remained. However, they were all covered in injuries. His skin had been torn to shreds, and his skin had been charred black like a roasted chicken leg. There was also a strange golden light flowing around his wounds, seemingly preventing him from recovering. I sucked in a cold breath. Was this really the strongest lord of tyranny in the world? Why did he look like a leftover chicken leg? Cough, cough. I meant that I should be careful. It would be impossible for me to miss at such a close distance. It would seem that Sarwinston had taken all the attacks head-on and survived, although this was probably the most pitiful state he had ever been in. Right after that, Harloise showed me another image. This was a skull that was lying in thunder flames. That pale white soul fire seemed like it would be extinguished at any moment. However, the hatred and curses contained within it seemed almost tangible. Shupness? Yep, he used Sarwinston as a meat shield to survive. Apart from them, everyone else is dead, including a devil lord and a dimensional door. The next image was a bird's eye view of Asalivis. It was as if someone had used a rubber stopper to erase the entire city. Large swathes of the city were unreasonably white, and that line directly broke through a dimensional door. It then extended out from the city, pierced through the mountains, and went off into the distance. Is this still a sword? Isn't this just a map cannon? In this day and age, there are far too many maps and maps that use swords. Didn't you see that the swordsman next door has all become cannoneers? There are even 7 or 8 identical faces. It's long past time for them to properly slash and slash. I decided to ignore this mysterious comment. However, it would seem that my system was in a good mood. With this, you can finally beat up your younger brother. At the very least, this means that my education level is just as good as my younger sister's. Although I was quite conflicted, I took a roundabout way and finally understood what she was saying. I didn't expect that she would still take this to heart. Of course, you're made of the same material, but you're always so much weaker than your younger brother. It would be strange if you didn't have such thoughts. If you had been a little more ambitious, I wouldn't have had to hold it in for so many years. But this time, you can finally stand on the same level as him. Her tone was filled with displeasure at first, but her tone became rather calm and filled with emotion at the end. It was as if a mother who finally wants her son to succeed. From a certain standpoint, I'm indeed your mother. I was instantly rendered speechless. From a certain standpoint, you're the mother of every living creature in the world. Don't just casually call yourself someone's mother. I'm really your mother. I rationally abandoned this topic and completely ignored my system, who was still laughing in my mind. If I continued talking about this, my head would probably explode. I should focus on what was at hand first. Sarwinston didn't die. Actually, this was within my expectations from the very start. A chaos main god would have plenty of life-saving methods. Even if that attack had been a real one, and even if the power level of the attack had been high enough to threaten Sarwinston, he would still have methods to escape. It was already a pleasant surprise that Sarwinston was able to survive to such an extent. As for what would happen next, I decided to wait for the news. After all, Sarwinston was a chaos main god and an undead emperor, so he would definitely have the ability to survive even after death. He would also have plenty of methods to die together with Sarwinston. It would be far too foolish of me to try and land the killing blow on Sarwinston and get killed instead. Now it's time to show off and then run. I mean to say that it's time for a victory shift. Chapter 764. Ever since the fairies got involved in the news industry, the speed at which information was disseminated in this world had greatly increased. As long as there was a nearby fairy station and they subscribed to the Black Forest Daily News, They would be able to learn about the major events that happened several days ago on the other side of the world. But recently, the fairies were having trouble keeping up with the news. It was impossible for the Holy War to end without mercy. The result of the entire world being at war was that there would be major news every day. In the past, the death of a king or the destruction of an entire army would be headline news. But now, the destruction of a small or medium-sized kingdom would probably only be on the second page. Did it all sound like bad news? The result of having bad news everywhere was that the good news would be infinitely magnified. A devil lord invaded the mortal plane and was attacked by the strongest holy knight. But on the next day, the fairies controlled more than 100 newspapers and magazines, and they all used the same headline. Below the headline was a memory of Sarwinston, who only had half a dragon's head left. Even though he was in an incredibly pitiful state, he was still capable of instilling fear in mortals. The source of all evil that could only appear in myths was lying right in front of them, and in such a pitiful state at that. This was far too shocking. For a certain dimension, this was the equivalent of Demon King Satan suddenly appearing and intending to settle old scores with God, only to be smashed in the head by a random brick right after he crawled out of hell, causing his brain to splatter. This seemed rather strange, but the meaning was more or less the same. In the end, no matter which publication it was, they all used more than half of the space to report on this event. They talked about the past deeds of the great Demon King, discussing his status, influence, and how many experts he had killed. In the end, they all came to the same conclusion. The results of this battle were shocking, unbelievable, and inspiring. This is the greatest battle result since the Holy War began. Compared to the strongest holy knight who has achieved astonishing battle results time and time again, the Holy Church is nothing more than a bunch of nobodies who only know how to make a ruckus. In the most sensational news, there would always be a small headline in parentheses on the last page. Sarwinston's ally, the undead Emperor Shupness, was accidentally injured by the shockwaves. There would also be a picture of a pitiful skull in the middle. Ally A. Accidentally injured? Accidental injury? If I were Shupness, I would probably explode in anger upon seeing these words. Being treated like this with a small title on the last page was even more humiliating than being seriously injured by an assassin. Idle fish. The Holy Church, who attracted the most attention for no reason, was the fact that even the fairies dared to directly criticize the Holy Church. From a certain perspective, the Holy Church's reputation had been greatly reduced recently. If the Holy Church didn't do something of importance soon, not only would it be impossible for the Holy Church to take the initiative in the Holy War, it was even possible that the Holy Church would be forced out of the stage by the alliance of the major factions. Actually, these two weren't even the most pitiful of all. The most pitiful of all was a Devil Lord. He didn't even have the chance to report his name before he died. Everyone even tacitly forgot about his existence. I am the Demon King under the throne of the great Demon King Satan. Just as he appeared on the stage, before he could even finish his registration, he was turned into ashes in a flash of light. It couldn't be any more tragic. Even though this Devil Lord was clearly a vicious character who dominated all the planes, a character that mortals feared and even the gods feared, he was reduced to such a tragic character with comedic effects. It was truly a sigh. The battlefield in Bardi, which nobody paid much attention to previously, suddenly became the focus of attention. It instantly surpassed the meat grinder in San Antonio and became the most watched battlefield in the entire mortal plane. Roland himself also became the focus of attention once again. This time, the fairies didn't intend to adjust the calamity rankings again because it was impossible to increase it any further. In fact, they were even hesitating about whether or not to remove him from the calamity rankings. After all, the main reason for being on the calamity rankings was because he was dangerous. From a certain standpoint, Roland had already used his actions to prove his loyalty to the fairies. Roland's power level instantly increased by several levels. He had originally been a level 4 main god, but now he was a level 5 main god. A level 20 main god would be a main god, while a level 10 main god would be a level 5 main god. This meant that a level 5 main god would have the ability to threaten a main god. However, this level 5 main god wouldn't be able to defeat a main god yet. Actually, this evaluation was incredibly unreliable. No matter if it was Sophocles, Sarwinston, or even that seraph and undead emperor, they were all imaginary enemies of mine. They were all existences that would be countered by my myth-ranked weapon. Not only that, I had been able to achieve such a good result by using my trump card for the first time. If it had been an opponent that I couldn't counter, such as a nature god, a dwarf god, or a chaos evil god that leaned toward the Order faction but was now a primordial god, let alone a main god, I would have turned around and fled even if the opponent was a main god. After all, I had only created 1 out of 4 magic swords. I was far from reaching my limit. However, this so-called power level was just like that. It could only be used as a general reference for newcomers and laymen. Every powerful existence would have their own path and all sorts of strange abilities. Who was strong, who was weak, and who was countered by whom could only be determined through actual combat. The greatest use of a power level rating was to help newcomers understand their own limits, so that they wouldn't immediately try to challenge ridiculously powerful opponents. That would be better than getting hot-headed and courting death just because the power level rating was good. For me, the fairies' power level ratings were nothing more than entertainment. Returning to the battlefield would be even more troublesome and fun. Sarwinston's assassination didn't end this war. In fact, it was the exact opposite. After the furious Devil Lord recovered slightly, he spared no expense in opening up even more chaos dimensional doors. More and more devil generals and commanders swarmed out under the Devil Lord summons. Barty's human allied army was no idiot. After confirming the authenticity of this information, they unhesitatingly increased the pace of their advance. Both sides clashed against each other, beginning a cruel war of attrition. The Wood Spirits Forest of Dreams also began sending out combat squads to deal with the devils and undead. On the main battlefield, Barty also unhesitatingly fought against the Devil Army. Barty was a country that had suffered many calamities. The Holy Church had allied together to invade. The Mage country had become enemies with them. The Undead Calamity's first invasion and the Undead Calamity's second invasion. Now, the Devil Army had invaded Barty. Although it could be said that Barty was incredibly unlucky, from another perspective, this also proved that Barty's people and country were astonishingly resilient and powerful. They wouldn't be defeated so easily. Now that I had successfully escaped from Asalivis, I met with a new problem. The devils and undead following me were far too passionate. It seemed that no matter where I went, they would follow me to the end. Chapter 765. Summer came rather early in the 10th year of the dawn of newborns. It had been raining furiously in the central region of the continent for 2 weeks. After a short but substantial rainy season, the temperature rapidly rose, and midsummer arrived in the blink of an eye. However, the rapid end of the rainy season wasn't necessarily a good thing. Perhaps many people wouldn't understand, but although the rainy season caused a tremendous amount of trouble for the local residents' war preparations and logistical preparations, it was actually the dimensional invaders who suffered the most. From a certain standpoint, war was the fairest of all. Both sides would suffer equal pain and difficulties. The rain made it difficult for the local armies, and the devils, demons, and ogres who were already in a difficult logistical situation to begin with were now stuck in a quagmire. Very few people would consider whether or not the omnipotent devils and demons from myths would also require logistical supplies when they came to the mortal world. It seemed as if they could fill their stomachs by eating human corpses, but in reality, not only did they require supplies, they required an astonishing amount of them. Although demons always shouted about how they would eat you and devour your soul, there were actually very few demons who would actually devour humans on the battlefield. After all, intelligent creatures would have an instinctive discomfort with devouring other intelligent creatures. More importantly, they were also creatures with a sense of smell. If they had a choice, they wouldn't really like smelly raw flesh. Low-level demons weren't picky, so they didn't need to worry about not having enough food. The more intelligent and high-level demons were, the more they would need ordinary food in order to satisfy their soul's endless thirst. As for the devils, they would always look down on beasts that ate raw meat and would do their best to maintain their so-called elegance. Even when enjoying the souls of mortals, they would do their best to maintain their elegance and benefit by using cutlery, knives, and forks. Not only did they need cooked meat and bread, mid- and high-level devils even needed medicine, wine, and tobacco that had special senses. These things were all rather expensive luxuries. If this was the chaos abyss, no matter if it was a demon or a devil, no matter which chaos abyss they were conquering, they wouldn't need to worry about logistical problems. Even if they didn't have enough supplies, the little Anababas and other dimensional merchants would take the initiative to follow them. And victory would also bring plenty of spoils of war, which would naturally include supplies. Lose? If you lost, you would become someone else's spoils of war. There would be no meaning in thinking about such things. But this time, it would be impossible. The entire mortal plane was an enemy. Apart from lunatics and evil cultists, nobody would have any good intentions towards invaders from the lower planes, not to mention trading with them. The Lord of Tyranny's assassination had not only boosted the devil's morale, Roland's attack had directly shattered the devil's relaxed attitude, as if they were on vacation, as well as a stable dimensional teleportation portal. The former had displayed the Devil Lord's pitiful state for all the devils to see. All devils that enter the mortal plane would have to consider their own futures. Actively participating in battle would have completely different effects than passively summoning the devils. As for the latter, it wasn't just a matter of having 4-dimensional doors left after destroying one. The destruction of one-dimensional door directly caused a complete imbalance in the energy balance of the dimensional doors. Spatial cracks and shock waves exploded simultaneously. Not only was the exit to the chaos abyss destroyed, but the other dimensional doors would have to wait until the spatial fluctuations were balanced before they could be used again. This greatly delayed the devil's invasion. This was especially so for the sly and selfish lower plane residents. They had a perfect excuse to watch the situation develop. They could choose to become deserters or listen to orders but not do anything. The human generals wouldn't miss such a rare opportunity. After receiving news of the devil's invasion, they immediately commanded their armies to attack with the Royal Dragon Knights at the vanguard. They didn't hesitate to pay any price. Since the devil's leader was recovering from his injuries and no one was supervising him, the devil's already weak leadership naturally fell into chaos. Many of the devil armies on the front lines could only fight on their own. They had just arrived in the mortal plane, and they still needed to adapt to the environment. This was especially so since most of the lower planes didn't have any rain. This made the unprepared devil armies suffer losses. Of course, this was only a loss. After all, the devil lords were leading devil armies. Their imaginary enemies were angels and dragons to begin with. It was already quite the bullying for mortals. Devils' natural elemental magic resistance and magical abilities meant that most devils had a certain amount of spellcasting ability. This difference in individual combat strength gave the human elites a taste of what it felt like to be cannon fodder. Both sides suffered astonishing losses. Perhaps this was luck brought about by misfortune. After that bitter battle in the rain, the human elite knights' resistance to battles in water and rain had greatly improved. Some devils hadn't seen rain for hundreds of years. Their natural resistance to acid and fire was useless against natural rain. Plus, they weren't familiar with the terrain. It was a terrible feeling to be surrounded by enemies on a dark, rainy night. Once they were scattered, it was easy for them to flee. It was impossible to calculate the number of casualties on both sides. That was because nobody knew how many corpses had sunk into the swamps and swamps of the rain. However, the human generals were unable to handle the fact that the elites were like cannon fodder. But at this time, the human generals hoped to make use of their short-term advantages to expand the battle. No matter how many losses they suffered, they gritted their teeth and persevered. The devils also knew that reinforcements would only come if they persevered. The supervisors and domain lords behind them wouldn't be easy to fool. The devils had just arrived in the mortal plane to enjoy themselves, yet they had to roll around in the swamps with bumpkins. Many devils were filled with regret. This also caused problems in recruiting soldiers in the lower planes. For the demons, this was only the beginning of the disaster. The devils took over the undead's territory, as well as the undead's mess. Asalivis, the undead capital that had been accidentally created, wasn't suitable to be the undead's main headquarters. That was because it was too close to enemy forces. The wood spirits' forest of dreams was right in front of them. In the past, the undead army had suppressed the wood spirits, forcing the wood spirits to rely on the forest of dreams' geographical advantage to passively defend. But now, the situation had changed. The wood spirits were actively attacking. Even though they didn't have a large number of troops, they were a true threat to Asalivis. Even without a battle of attrition, the wood spirits only needed to send people to the outskirts of the battlefield to restrain the devil armies. Not to mention, the wood spirits had received requests from Bardi and the other countries to send out battalions and fleets that would be enough to last several years in a major battle. To the west was the Forest of Dreams, which had become a meat grinder. 10 years had allowed the wood spirits, a silver species, to reach the peak of the world. And these 10 years hadn't been peaceful. Although the wood spirits hadn't fought to the death against the undead, they hadn't stopped. Not only were all the wood spirits that had grown up in the fires of war an expert at defense and forest warfare, the contract heroes that had been on the defensive for an entire 10 years had also become quite powerful. In terms of individual combat strength, the wood spirits, together with the magical plants and geographical advantages, were still able to suppress the devils. But the existence of the Forest of Dreams made it impossible for the devils to obtain a decisive victory from the very start, since their foundations were unstable. To the east were the Bardi Knight and Dragon Knight, who were doing their best to defend their homeland. They were the elites of the elites, and they were willing to pay any price to protect their homeland. Plus, they had sufficient logistics and could afford to fight a war of attrition. The devils were simultaneously dealing with two major threats. By the time the front lines were fully spread out, the entire battlefield was already larger than many small and medium-sized countries. The complicated battlefield terrain was a living hell for supply convoys, especially since the dragons had taken away control of the skies. Sending supplies to the front lines was like sending a suicide squad to the execution ground. Whoever was chosen would die. In the end, the devil lords and powerful devils personally moved out in order to maintain the supply lines of the front lines. However, they ended up becoming high-priced prey for the devils. The logisticians' and supply officers' nightmares had only just begun. The overly long and complicated supply lines showed the devil's weaknesses. The Forest of Dreams gave the contract heroes a large number of missions to ambush supply convoys, allowing the new generation of contract heroes to enjoy the fun of grinding points. The wood spirits were now overflowing with wealth. The top 10 on the monthly leaderboard would receive a large bonus reward. However, it was likely that the wood spirits would be unable to catch up to this month's number 1 ranking. That was because the moment that person's name was at the top of the leaderboard, everyone lost the will to compete. Roland missed? Why is he in the Forest of Dreams? Why is he grinding points? Chapter 766. Actually, it's not that I want to farm points. It's that the points want to farm me. Actually, I felt rather helpless. It wasn't that I wanted to farm points in the Forest of Dreams. It was that the moment I appeared at the edge of the battlefield, all the devils and undead would madly charge at me. It would be impossible for me not to farm points even if I wanted to. This was even more ridiculous than a full-screen taunt. It was as if someone shouted something in the world chat the moment I appeared. Roland has respawned at XX location. Everyone, hurry up and farm him. All the devil and undead players in the server stopped whatever they were doing and focused on farming Roland. In fact, I hadn't even come to the Forest of Dreams of my own volition. It was just that by the time I finally recovered a certain amount of combat strength and walked out of that world, the humans and devils were already engaged in a bloody meat grinder battle. However, it seemed that neither side had forgotten about me. Asalivus was always surrounded by dozens of undead. Not long after I left the Forest of Dreams, a patrolling ghost noticed me. The moment I exposed myself, the Devil Lords and Undead Lords formed a party to raid me. I intended to turn around and kill them one or two at a time, but when 40, 80, or even 120 of them came at me at once, I wouldn't be able to handle them, even if I was the real boss. And as I fought, more and more Lord-level cannon fodder would appear. They even brought their own cannon fodder to waste my stamina. I had never seen such shamelessness before. I could only helplessly choose to flee after a few rounds of explosions. The result was that I was being chased after by others. I actually wanted to run towards the human allied armies, but I discovered that as long as I appeared on the main battlefield, not only would the undead lords and powerful devils continue to chase me to the end, the moment my coordinates were obviously locked onto, Asalivus would soon toss out AoE cannons to start a large-scale bombardment. The end result was that all the human generals and defense lines refused to allow me to enter. In the end, wherever I went, there would be a mass migration. I really had no choice but to run. I had to drag several hundred powerful devils and undead behind me. Nobody would be able to handle such a situation. All right then, I admit that I accidentally became a true jinx that blew up everywhere I went. I had to leave my train everywhere I went. It was a pity that the Holy Church's members weren't here. Otherwise, I would have been able to watch a good show. I didn't know how much the Lord of Tyranny and Shupness hated me. But the powerful individuals behind me were definitely more than 70% of their high-level combat strength. It would be far too irrational and overboard for them to use just to hunt me down. Too much. With so many lords chasing after you, it would be strange if you didn't die. The silly cat had already dispelled her doppelganger and was watching the show as if it had nothing to do with her. I could only helplessly choose to head west. After all, everyone knew that the Forest of Dreams was the strongest line of defense. Even undead lords and powerful devils wouldn't be foolish enough to enter the Forest of Dreams to their deaths. However, I really didn't know just how much bounty I had on me right now. These undead and devils were supposed to be busy, but they would rather stay in the Forest of Dreams than return to the Forest of Dreams. The end result was that the moment I left the Forest of Dreams, I would be surrounded by a large group of people and forcefully blocked off. This isn't going according to the script. Everyone else finally mastered a godly technique, broke through to the next level, and killed powerful enemies. Then they killed all who stood in their way and reached the peak. Why is it that even though I've clearly become stronger and have a deadly weapon in my hands, my life has become even more pitiful than before? Perhaps, from a certain standpoint, it's because of the ultimate weapon in your hands. Nobody would want to be like those two unlucky fellows who were mysteriously beaten half to death by you. That's why they'll think of a way to kill you first. I instantly came to a realization upon hearing this. Large countries had strategic weapons in order to intimidate others. If a small country had strategic weapons, but didn't have enough resources, they wouldn't be able to prove that they had the power to become the ruler of the Forest of Dreams. Others would think of ways to kill them before they could rise up. It would seem that I'll need to think of an even bigger plan. Of course, it's mostly because of the devils and undead's personal grudges. It would be strange if they didn't hunt you down to the very end after you were in such a pitiful state. Once they recover, they'll definitely personally come after you to the death. Heloise's words made me feel like my previous thoughts were meaningless. As expected, personal grudges were the true reason why I was being hunted down. Since I couldn't leave the Forest of Dreams, I could only wander around aimlessly. Recently, I had killed quite a few undead and devils. I went to the local church branch that was in charge of exchanging fate points and updated my combat results and statistics. I then mysteriously increased my fate points to the maximum. The staff member in charge of registration even asked me if I wanted to publicize my fate points. Now that the entire world knew that I was here, there was nothing I couldn't publicize. Since I had earned money, I naturally wanted to spend it. I decided to go on a large shopping spree. The Forest of Dreams had many local specialties. Right now, the most famous ones were probably the dusk fruit and dawn fruit. Each one of them was equivalent to 5 years of lifespan. Of course, for the vast majority of people, the dawn fruit that increased their lifespan by 5 years was something that they could only dream of. I didn't spend my fate points on dawn fruits because I had already eaten more than enough dusk fruits. Lifespan wasn't really that meaningful to me. After all, I had never lived to the natural end of my lifespan. I had basically died on the way here. The wood spirit's treasures weren't limited to just these 2 types of fruits. Long ago, the wood spirits had used their divine power of nature to create fruits that would permanently increase one's stats. These fruits could fundamentally change the user's physique, strength, and agility, making up for natural deficiencies. From a certain standpoint, this was a miracle for those who had reached the level of the creator goddesses. Perhaps the system's stat evaluation would be incomprehensible to most people, but for others, these miraculous fruits would allow them to run faster, have greater strength, react faster, and have a healthier and stronger body. Newbie adventurers would always love ultimate techniques and forbidden spells. But for true veterans who had experienced life and death situations, only they would know that basic abilities were the foundation of everything. The adventurers who were stuck at a bottleneck due to their lack of talent were even more overjoyed. For a while, these precious fruits sold like hotcakes. But soon, the adventurers discovered that these fruits were lacking. First, these fruits were extremely expensive, and the amount they could increase was rather low. Second, after eating a certain amount, the effects would rapidly decrease or even become ineffective. Third, there were problems with the direction in which the fruits could increase one's strength. Some warriors had worked so hard to obtain a strength fruit, but after eating one, they discovered that it didn't increase their strength at all. However, as a pure heavy shield warrior, they had no need for reaction speed. After reaching a certain level, it would be impossible to change the direction of the fruits. Although they had paid a high price for the fruits, they still didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Actually, this was determined by the basic principles of these fruits. They were pure life energy that could make up for and increase one's life's deficiencies. However, this was limited by the individual's limits and talent. Some people were actually quite suited to be thieves, but they were born into a knight family and eventually became a heavy armor warrior. When they worked hard to the extreme, it was also time for them to compete on talent. However, their natural limits were already limiting their potential. These fruits wouldn't give them a chance to start all over again. They could only activate their potential based on their own foundation in order to make up for and increase their strength. The end result would be that one's strengths would be pushed to the extreme and one's potential would be unlocked. Even eating the fruits would have limited benefits. Places that one wouldn't normally train and would instead be more likely to activate their useless potential. But for me, these fruits contain life energy, so it would be quite difficult for me to reach a bottleneck in the short term. That's because I'm a semi-god, and a semi-god that just recently advanced. After becoming a semi-god, I had fused with a myth-ranked weapon, which meant that I had basically completed a species evolution. I was no longer human, so I naturally surpassed the limits and limitations of a human. Although semi-gods still had limits, those limits were much higher than ordinary people. It seemed that even after so many years had passed, this little secret still hadn't spread. Perhaps it was because semi-god powerhouses no longer cared about improving their strength through external items. Or perhaps it was because the few people who knew the truth hid this secret in order to monopolize the fruits. After all, there was a limit to how many of these fruits could be produced every month. However, this month's production suddenly increased by more than 10 times, yet there were no more fruits on the market. Would anyone believe me if I told them that I didn't pull strings? Semi-god powerhouses would need large amounts of practical combat and bitter cultivation to improve themselves after breaking through the natural talent limit of their species. However, it seemed that I was able to increase my stats by simply eating fruits. Right now, I was actually having quite a good time. Every day, I would go out to kill wild monsters, eat fruits, kill wild monsters, and eat fruits. It was likely that I would be too lazy to move around before I reached my limit, and there weren't any more stat fruits on the market. Eating fruits can increase my stats? What a comfortable way to cultivate. What a rare vacation time, but sometimes I really couldn't say such things out loud. The moment I said them out loud, new troubles would follow. Chapter 767. Compared to 10 years ago, the Forest of Dreams had indeed changed. However, these changes wouldn't be obvious unless one carefully observed them. As a living forest with its own will, the Forest of Dreams, or perhaps I should say that Amelia herself was constantly expanding her own domain. Perhaps it wouldn't be obvious if one was in the Forest of Dreams, but if one had a satellite image, they would discover that the Forest of Dreams area was increasing by more than 30% every year. In the past 10 years, the Forest of Dreams area had increased by more than 10 times. Apart from natural growth, the wood spirits were also working hard to expand their forest, or perhaps I should call it their country. This had been their top priority for the past few years. Back in the day, they had hired warriors to plant seeds in the forest's outskirts to expand the forest. As time passed, the forests were connected, and the Forest of Dreams area naturally increased exponentially. More land meant more natural energy. This also meant that more souls were entering the Forest of Dreams' natural cycle. The number of new wood spirits and their species was also increasing exponentially. Amelia's personal power level was also increasing exponentially. As the will of an entire world, it could be said that the entire Forest of Dreams was her physical body. All the wood spirits were her children and descendants. Compared to how direct and extreme she had been in the past, the current Amelia was becoming more and more low-key and gentle. She seemed even more terrifying and unfathomable. She's probably already reached the so-called main god level. I had no doubt about this at all. It was just that the wood spirits products were becoming more and more inconceivable. In fact, ever since the birth of the dusk fruit, which had reached the level of lifespan in the mysteries of life, I viewed her as a new nature main god or life main god. The only existence in the nature faction who had reached main god level was the Earth Mother, who had long since lost her will. It was still doubtful if she could be considered a part of the nature faction. At the very least, if a nature god met with a calamity, it would be impossible to count on her. The nature faction did indeed have many gods, ranging from moderate to extreme. However, none of them had the ambition to become a ruler. They were generally lacking in aggressiveness, as long as you didn't chop down trees right in front of them. They would usually choose a remote mountain or forest to do whatever they wanted, which made them seem rather lacking in presence. However, because the nature gods were far too ancient and had many worshippers on the surface, all druids and nature mages could be considered part of the nature gods faction. The only obvious weakness of the nature gods was that they always lacked top-level combat strength, a main god-level god king. Previously, the nature faction had been trying to be friendly to Amelia, as if they wanted to recruit her into their faction to strengthen their foundations. However, when she displayed her newest creation, the nature faction's gods faintly began to distance themselves. After all, it was a good thing to have a strong and capable comrade for one's faction, but to have a boss for one's faction, everyone had to think about it. Amelia didn't say anything. She didn't refuse, nor did she agree. She simply focused on developing her with spirit race. I knew that she looked down on the nature gods, who were scattered and had many factions within them. She was also waiting for them to offer a better price. If the price was right, it wouldn't be impossible for her to use her name in exchange for great benefits. As for the difference in the philosophy of life between the two sides, it was actually not a big deal. After all, within the natural god system, many gods had their own factions in small circles, so it was not a big deal to have one more. Even if they couldn't come to an agreement in the end, that was fine. The 7 virtues all had the foundational power and foundation to ascend to godhood, and they didn't even have to rely on the original gods they worshipped. As long as Amelia and the wood spirits were given enough time, they would be able to create their own new wood spirit god faction. And actually, that was exactly what they were doing. It sounded quite legendary and inconceivable, but since the elves had their own elven god faction, which had already collapsed, the humans had their own holy light god faction, which was currently collapsing, and the dwarves also had their own god faction, which had fallen into decline and merged together with the nature faction. The wood spirits naturally had their own god faction as well. I've already seen through Amelia's scheme. She's just trying to rope in able-bodied men. I'm a man, and I definitely won't join a god system that's filled with women. All right then, I casually talked nonsense as I strolled around. Basically, all the wood spirits in the Forest of Dreams recognized me, which allowed me to enjoy the rare VIP treatment. It actually felt quite nice. The distant battlefield never showed any signs of stopping. There were contract heroes of all species hurrying here and there. Although more than 70% of them were humans, I still saw wood spirits, elves, and beastmen. There were even quite a few gray elves and half-demons. As expected, being an adventurer was the most inconceivable job class. No matter what species or job class, it was possible for adventurers to travel together. Some of them had just returned from the battlefield, while others were about to enter the battlefield. Whether or not they could return alive would depend on their own power levels and companions. The Forest of Dreams had always been the most popular battlefield for contract heroes. Every day, there would be an incalculable number of visitors. Apart from the wood spirits' precious products here, the most fundamental reason was that the Forest of Dreams was the safest dimensional battlefield. Yes, it was the safest. Even if the enemy had been an endless army of undead, and the enemy now was an endless army of devils, this was still the safest place for contract heroes to farm points. The reason? There was no other reason. The Forest of Dreams would always be there. Even the enemy semi-god level 4 existences wouldn't dare to take a single step inside. This was a safe place to rest, heal, and run away if they couldn't win. This was something that no other battlefield would even dare to dream of. The most dangerous part of the dimensional battlefield wasn't the never-ending battles of attrition. Rather, it was the fact that you couldn't choose your opponent at all. If you met a level 4 existence that was far stronger than you, it would be impossible for you to win. Right now, I was currently using the Forest of Dreams as a cover to hide from the enemies who were hunting me down everywhere. As expected, having an absolutely safe shelter really makes me happy. Oh no, the front lines have been broken through. Hearing this abnormal scream, my first reaction was that there was a traitor, which was absolutely impossible. My second reaction was that my jinxed mouth wasn't salvageable. Perhaps I should wear an iron jaw in the future so that I could completely shut up. Or, from a different perspective, it's a weapon of the law of karma. In the future, I'll always curse. No, praise my enemies. Common sense dictated that the Forest of Dreams should be impossible to break through. However, what was happening right now made the impossible possible. Outside the Forest of Dreams, the newly born trees were dying in large numbers. The entire Forest of Dreams was trembling slightly, as if it were a creature in pain. There was only one explanation for this scene. Something happened to Amelia? Who could possibly harm her? I was truly astonished. In my mind, Amelia was definitely one of the most difficult opponents to deal with in the entire world. Her nature and life powers weren't particularly offensive, but they were highly effective at countering her. Plant life form souls were also quite unique. None of my form magic swords were suitable for dealing with plants that were filled with life. Not to mention, Amelia had powerful physical and magical combat abilities. As long as I got close to her, I really couldn't think of a way to deal with her. Before I could regain my senses, Rosa, one of the 7 virtues, appeared behind me. Dad, Mom was beaten up by Uncle. Mom wants you to take revenge for her. I was instantly stunned. What was this all about? Uncle? My brother? Cavendish? Wasn't he looking for trouble with the Chaos Girls? Why was he looking for Amelia, who was obviously incredibly difficult to deal with? Wait a moment. There was only one explanation that made sense. Amelia is also a Chaos Girl? Chapter 768. Under the bright sunlight was a boundless field of flowers. However, unlike natural cultivation, there were far too many different types of flowers here, to the point where it was impossible to count them all. But the most common type of flowers were thorny flowers. There were vibrant red roses, elegant white lilies, mysterious purple tulips, and all sorts of flowers with different shapes and flowering periods bloomed at the same time for no reason at all. Over 100 different flower fragrances mixed together, yet none of them were tainted. Instead, they were mutually beneficial, just like cocktails. Just by standing at the edge of the field of flowers, I felt like I was being baptized by the flower's fragrance, which made me feel even more refreshed. Under the blazing sunlight, a green-haired, beautiful figure wearing a straw hat was busy working. She was carefully watering the flowers and pruning their branches. She would even chat with them from time to time. The flowers and leaves were also trembling in the wind, as if they were using their own way to respond to her care. The wind blew past the flowers, and the rustling of the treetops sounded like a chorus of gratitude. When the farmer gardener saw that I had arrived, she put down her water bottle and happily waved at me. A mischievous wind blew past, and the farmer girl's straw hat flew into the sky. Her silky green hair fluttered in the wind, and her gentle smile contained the joy of working. This scene caused time to stop. This scene doesn't seem right. Shouldn't Amelia be in a strange botanical garden, planting man-eating flowers and cursed mandalas? Is she at the wrong filming location for such a refreshing scene? What's wrong is your head. It's so rare to see this side of your mother. Don't you know what to say? Behind me, little Rosa suddenly bumped her head against my back, as if she was angry at Amelia's injustice. But since she wasn't tall enough, if it wasn't for the fact that she was tiptoeing to jump up and slap your face mode, it was likely that her head would have been in an awkward position. A lady shouldn't kick someone's butt with her high heels. And you're even kicking. I hugged little Rosa, who was about to kick someone, and rubbed her head with both hands. It would be difficult for anyone to truly get angry at such a cute little girl. Not far away, Amelia had already passed by. She was carrying a flower basket in her hands, which seemed to contain some fresh fruits and vegetables. This scene was completely different from what I had expected. Wasn't she injured? Wasn't she ambushed by that bastard Cavendish? Why did he look like someone who had just returned from enjoying the farmhouse? You're here. Don't listen to the little guys. I only died once. Died once? Only? Originally, I was still very calm, but after hearing this, I lost my composure. As the Forest of Dreams Royal Garden, this flower field took up quite a large area. At the very least, I had never expected to see a villa and swimming pool in the middle of this garden. Judging from the wooden house's decor, it was actually at least 7 or 8 years old. There was even a kindergarten with all sorts of toys and entertainment facilities. If it wasn't for Amelia having some hidden interest, then what are you looking at? This is for the freshmen's younger sisters. Rosa doesn't need a swing or a slide. Rosa hates sandpits the most. She gets her clothes dirty every time. All right then, Rosa, you should learn more from your older sister. Isn't this a confession of your own accord? It would seem that this place was a nursery for the little fellows. Perhaps it could also be said to be the home of Amelia and the 7 virtues. Palace complex? That's for outsiders to see. To entertain Father, we naturally have to use our home. Little Rosa could tell that I was doubtful and proudly explained to me. So that was how it was. As expected, this was Amelia. Where are the other little fellows? Don't tell me that they're all busy. Apart from your oldest sister, Samantha, none of the other little girls have a fixed job. Outsiders would never be able to understand the wood spirit's social structure. The first 3 of the 7 virtues were born before I blessed them, so they were rather normal. This was especially true for Temperance Samantha. She was so self-disciplined and hard-working that I couldn't bear to watch her. As for the 4 virtues who were born later, they probably received too many blessings from me, so they became a bit more self-centered. Fine, I admit that they were a bit too individualistic, but at the very least, they were all good children. Fine, I lied. It would be difficult to reach the standard of good child, but at the very least, they were all cute. Yep, that's right. Being cute was justice. Cute children who were naughty would be painful at all. Uncute children who were naughty would be tied to rockets. What? Were there no children who weren't naughty? Well, if a cute little fellow wasn't naughty, it wouldn't be interesting at all. The wood spirits were undoubtedly cute. If I saw that the children were well-behaved, I would even think of ways to make them happy. For example, I recently purchased a potion from Olivia that could corrode fiber materials. It was quite effective, but unfortunately, all of them were like airplanes, so there wasn't much to see. However, perhaps it was because I was in a good mood recently that I had more opportunities to joke around. These little girls were becoming more and more vigilant. Apart from Samantha, none of the other 7 virtues appeared in front of me. Samantha, the current leader of the Wood Spirits, who often appeared in front of me, was far too serious. She was always lecturing me, and it was quite boring even if I wanted to tease her. I once again untied Rosa's braids that she had just finished braiding and teased her as she pounded me with her tiny fists. Then, I happily looked down at her with my superior attitude. I couldn't help but laugh out loud as I watched Rosa become more and more upset. It doesn't matter how tall a mountain is. It doesn't matter how tall a person is. It's fine as long as they're taller than you. Eating a dust fruit to grow taller was truly the wisest choice. Rosa then instantly burst into tears as she kept pounding me with her tiny fists. However, I only laughed even more happily as I treated it as a massage. You're just like a child who can't grow up. Amelia finished making some fruit dishes and brought them over to me. They were all fresh fruits that seemed quite ordinary. There were apples, oranges, bananas, and even Harlow's favorite eggplant. Speaking of Harlow's, it was quite strange that I couldn't find any of her clones after entering this flower field. I felt quite uncomfortable without a professional commenting nearby. My clones were all killed off by the woman before you. Ah, it's another man-eating flower. Can you try something different? Is this clone going to be killed off as well? Amelia, new tricks aren't for you to change your tentacles. Let go of me. You're not Bayfoam, so why are you interested in cats? All right then, I see. I thank Amelia for providing us with so much fun with her comments. I also observed a moment of silence for Amelia's clone 107, who had been sacrificed yet again. Now let us focus on the most important issue at hand. Cavendish, how did I find you? Weren't you supposed to be on the human side? Amelia was a high-level member of the human allied armies, especially since she was both a member of the Bardi royalty and a truth mage. She was also the lubricant between the mage country and the Bardi Empire. Even if I escaped, Amelia shouldn't have been able to escape. Amelia should currently be working hard on the northern battlefront. Why did she appear in front of me? And what did she mean by dying once? Amelia smiled wryly when she heard this. This time, I really did die once. I more or less understood what had happened as Amelia explained the situation to me. This incident had actually happened quite recently. Amelia had been ambushed by Cavendish at around 8 a.m. this morning. The Abyss Prince's attack had been quite direct. A fireball descended from the sky and directly flattened the nearby human camp, creating a large crater with a radius of 50 meters. Amelia then fought him fiercely. Amelia lost, but Cavendish didn't have an easy time either. I clicked my tongue as I listened. This story sounded quite ordinary, but there was quite a lot of information in it. What was unexpected, but reasonable, was that Amelia had indeed reached the level of a main god. From a certain standpoint, the power of nature still had a natural enemy. It feared the power of chaos, which could distort nature and natural laws. Drool and nature priests hated demon warlocks and dark cultists the most. Meanwhile, the nature faction loved to open up their personal domains as they fought and changed the terrain of the world. Powerful demons had their own chaos abyss domain, which was perfect for distorting nature and completely countered them. If you summoned plants, they would cause the plants to decay and die. If you summoned animal companions, they would cause the animals to demonize into magical beasts. If you used nature magic to summon calamities to attack, powerful demons could use their will to distort nature. However, considering that the nature faction had once been the main pillar of order in the mortal plane, and the power of chaos had always been the core of the chaos faction, it was understandable that the nature faction would keep weakening as they fought against each other. Amelia's power countered mine, my power countered Cavendish's, and Cavendish's power countered Amelia's. Such a chaotic relationship might sound troublesome, but it was actually a mutual restraint between factions. This was common knowledge. This kind of restraint could allow one to have an advantage across several levels. If Amelia really was as she said, and although she lost, her power countered Cavendish's, she still faintly caused Cavendish to suffer a major disadvantage, then this could only mean one thing. Amelia, you're already stronger than Cavendish? Amelia smiled as she shook her head. Compared to the veteran main gods, there's still quite a bit of a difference. When I discovered that it would be difficult for me to win or lose, I directly detonated that physical body of mine and returned here. As she spoke, the entire forest began to murmur. Every tree, flower, shrub, and vine was making a rhythmic sound. At this moment, I confirmed my previous guess. This entire forest was Amelia. As long as the forest of dreams and the wood spirits didn't die, Amelia would never die. Even I, who wasn't particularly competitive, felt rather complex emotions as I looked at the woman before me. Others were naturally talented and worked hard to cultivate for several hundred years. They would slay demons or slay gods to finally ascend to godhood. Wasn't it all for the sake of living longer and becoming stronger? However, those who ascended to godhood would gain just as much as they lost. Amelia had never had any ambition to ascend to godhood. According to what I knew, she didn't even have any desire for power. Yet, she had obtained true immortality and eternity. In fact, in terms of godhood, she was on the same level as the creator goddess herself. This definitely wasn't a realm that could be reached through hard work and talent. In fact, I couldn't even say what method she had used to reach this level. If I had to find a reason, luck? Or perhaps a nicer word would be fate. Amelia's immortality was different from the order gods who were stuck to their divine concepts or godhoods. Amelia's immortality was absolute freedom and limitless evolution. Not only that, she had created her own god faction together with her family. Most importantly, obtaining such immortality was 99% due to luck. If news of this spread, many gods would probably go mad with jealousy. Actually, if you want such immortality, I can share it with you as well. The green-haired girl chuckled. At this moment, I was certain that this woman was capable of reading minds. Although she was speaking in a joking tone, I knew that Amelia was being serious. If I nodded, as long as I bound my soul to this forest, I would naturally become the original god of this forest and obtain immortality with my accumulations. Although I'm quite envious, there are some things I still need to do. I can only apologize. You're lying. Even if you don't have anything you need to do, you'll still refuse. I'm truly sorry, but I can't give you the life you want. If you like to live like a wild dog, continue wandering around the world. Amelia pouted, but her eyes were smiling. It was obvious that she was pretending to be angry. I was unable to keep up with this Amelia, who was becoming more and more complete and celestial, so I could only tell her the truth. Since you already know, why are you still inviting me? How insincere. I'm full of sincerity. Some things need to be done before giving up. You're saying that I'm insincere? Who's the one who promised to always come back to see the children? It's been so many years, but I haven't heard a single word from them, causing these children to spend more than 90% of their lives without a father. Every day they ask me, where's Dad? Amelia had actually learned to fake cry. Rosa cooperatively made a teary-eyed expression. This time, I was unable to handle it anymore. Compared to my previous domineering upperclassman, this upperclassman was hundreds of times more difficult to deal with, and so I directly took out a white handkerchief and waved it, waving the white flag in surrender. Let's get down to business. Just how powerful is Cavendish? That's right, my goal here was to ask Cavendish about his true power level, not because he was a so-called Chaos Girl. Since Cavendish had attacked Amelia, it was already evident that Amelia was a Chaos Girl. And after I completely understood what a Chaos Girl was from my system and ale, I was no longer interested in asking about the Chaos Girls. Even if she was a Chaos Girl, Amelia would still be Amelia, and Eliza would still be Eliza. She wouldn't become someone else just because of the origin of her soul. And now that it was confirmed that Amelia had already reached the creator level through this forest, it would be impossible for the other Chaos Girls or even main gods to return to their original power level. That was why I guessed that Cavendish hadn't given up because he couldn't defeat Amelia. Rather, he had discovered that continuing to fight would be meaningless, which was why he directly gave up. That was why asking about the Chaos Girls would be meaningless for me. As for Cavendish, that sly brat has never once fought seriously against me. There's no eyewitness information either. I don't even know what his concept or his myth-ranked weapon is.